Right. Hey, everybody. Oh, not yet. Jumped the gun. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the eFed podcast. Today, we're joined by one of the OGs of e-wrestling. From back in the day, it's Chad Merritt. Chad is infamous handler behind Hornet, who we know Hornet wins every time. So, the man behind FWrestling.com and the CSWA. Chad, thanks for joining the show today, buddy.
Is this where I pull my inner MJF and ask you to lower your chair, or ask for the real introduction by Brian? Or
I guess I'm too low
did you
already.
see that video today? That was
no,
awesome.
I did not.
MJF is on with the Barstool guys, and he's like, before we start this, and I will leave, you're going to need to lower your chair.
He's got to be the tallest guy in the room.
Yeah, and he says that's not enough. And the guy tries to raise it back up in the middle of the interview, calls him out, and tells him to lower it. So pretty awesome. MJF, the last real heel left in the business.
Oh, he's terrific. I absolutely love him, and he's a lot of fun. And the reason I watch some AEW. So there you have it.
Don't tell Dusty Shull. I don't know if you've met Dusty, but he's WWE all the way. And I every once in a while I pick on him on Twitter and tell him about all this great stuff in AEW, and he is not.
I mean, on the up and up, I'm more on the WWE side than I am AEW.
Gotcha. Well,
but I'm able to enjoy all products. How about that?
Yes. Well, that's how I am. I like it all. But yeah, shout out to Dusty and his NDW, which you may have heard of for the last 20 years.
Oh, we've heard of, absolutely. And Dusty's a good guy out there, and we've had a run-in the past, but I think things are all good.
That's all right. There's lots of run-ins in this hobby.
So many. So, Chad, let's talk about you. How did you get into pro wrestling?
It's a good question. It's so far back, I don't know that I remember, but what I do remember is, so Saturday at noon, wrestling would come on. This is way before your time. And I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than I am. And I remember at like 4 years old, laying in front of the TV, watching what at that time was the NWA, but Mid-Atlantic.
There you go.
Right. And so on Saturday, we'd watch Mid-Atlantic. And, I think people don't realize that Little Greensboro, North Carolina, right, the third largest city in the state. If I don't say that, Pete will put it there because it came up in role play years ago. But it was like the number 2 city for Jim Crockett Promotions. So they would run in Atlanta. They would run once in Atlanta at the Omni. They would run in Charlotte, which was their home base. But they came to Greensboro every 3 weeks. So, it was a big town for them. Greensboro had and still has, at this point, a 21,000 seat Coliseum, which, for, a town of 250,000 folks, pretty big.
So anyway, Arn Anderson always references.
Arn Anderson always references Greensboro. Greensboro's the home of Front Row Section D were these famous guys a generation above me. Bruce Mitchell, whose name we're not allowed to speak anymore, was a part of that. I still run into Bruce actually around town. He has no idea who I am, but I watched a pay-per-view in his horribly dirty apartment one time. It was a mistake, but he was talking. But it's funny, Jim Cornette's gone off on Bruce Mitchell, and he said, I haven't talked to Bruce Mitchell in 25 years, and I was like, that's not true. I was there when he was on the phone with Bruce Mitchell, and then I did the time, and I'm like, oh damn, that was really 25 years ago. That's hard to believe. So anyway, watched it with my brother. My brother was a fan of the heels. Of course, the Four Horsemen came around. After a while, we would convince my buddy Steven, and I would convince his dad or my dad, or as my brother got older, him to take us to shows at the Coliseum. And so we'd get to see Flair versus Jimmy Garvin and, the Road Warriors and, everybody you can think of, Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, all those guys. And we loved to yell at Jim Cornette, because he didn't sell anything. So anyway, that's pretty much how I got into it. And then, NWA became WCW and went from there.
It's really cool to be in that home base and get to go see those events and live in that era and get to see the rock and roll when everybody was going crazy and everything.
Well, of course, now it's demeaningly called Southern Wrestling, right? But, if you go back to that time, the reason, and it's not like we didn't watch WWF at the time, but it was so cartoony. Yeah. Right. And so if you get into that, you get into like that mid to late 90s era, You know, you had the Hulk Hogan cartoon, and everybody was a character, right? Duke the
Yeah.
Dumpster, and the Mountie, and everybody else. And if you were the generation below mine, and you were like 6, 7, 8, and that's what you saw, greatest thing you ever saw,
Perfect.
right? Hulk Hogan,
Perfect. Yeah.
you're a Hulkamaniac for life. But once you've seen the Four Horsemen break Dusty's arm in the back of a pickup truck,
Yeah. Whole new ball game.
you look at that and you're like, this is the corniest thing I've ever seen. Now, should I have been watching, Dusty get his arm broken and bleed all over the place at that age? Maybe, maybe not.
Probably
But
not.
yeah. Once you've seen that, it's sort of like you can't.
What else can you do? Yeah, you can't go back to
Yeah,
dropping the
pretty
leg,
much.
brother, hulking up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least not till '94 when he came over to WCW and ruined everything.
Yeah, and there you go. Yes, everything
right.
changed. Well, I was going to ask you how you. Well, let's talk about your favorite wrestlers ever before we get there.
You could probably guess by the name of the first character I ever created in this hobby, right? So I think Megan or somebody asked, does Hornet sting? Now the question is, does Sting Hornet?
A big fan of Sting.
Yeah, so 12 years old, we create these characters. The first one is Hornet, right, which is this ripoff of Sting. There are lots of other ripoffs that we'll talk about as we got started, and as most people in the hobby did early on. But Sting, Flair, certainly. If you're putting them up there, Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express, you can't talk about one without the other. Bobby Eaton. Bobby Eaton's one of the best wrestlers in history and one of the most underrated wrestlers in history.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't talk.
Yeah.
Right.
But he didn't need to.
He didn't need to because he had Cornette, right? But the first time you see the Alabama Jam back then, right?
Boom.
Remember this was the era right before Bill Watts said no jumping off the top rope, right? People forget about that. But those guys were absolutely phenomenal. And then as I got older, certainly the cruiserweights, right? The one that we're not allowed to talk about anymore. Yeah. Yes. Then Guerrero, Jericho. Jericho would be on my Mount Rushmore. I know that's not true for a lot of folks, but if you look at 30 years of stuff that he's done and where he's been in the thick of it, and he made the right moves every single time.
He has a huge body of work. Yeah.
Yeah. So, lots of reasons to, not pick him and pick a bunch of other people, but I'm picking people I like, not people I think were, the biggest draws ever.
There you go. Well, who else is on your Mount Rushmore? You mentioned Jericho.
Oh, Jericho, certainly Flair.
Sting.
Yeah, Sting. Sting from a purely personal standpoint, right? Because he was just awesome. Now he was a draw at certain times. He was never a draw the level of Flair, Hogan, or those guys. I don't know who I'd throw in there fourth, right? It might be a manager like Cornette, although Cornette has gone off the deep end in some ways these days, or Bobby Heenan, or somebody like that. I think those guys added so much, and we lost a lot of that. That's one of the big differences you see with WWE and AEW today. Is WWE, you get guys that can't get over, or they get their 3 weeks because, Vince or whoever thinks they can't talk. We'll put a manager on them. Brock's only good in 30-second increments.
Yeah, he thrived with Heyman.
And so, it's guys like that. And then you look at what they did with Cesaro and some others that's just disappointing. But that's true of any company, right? You get guys that are in there and become journeymen who shouldn't have been. Daniel Bryan, I might put on there. Bryan Danielson. I don't want to call him by his slave name, but yeah. And it's funny enough. We'll talk later about somebody in CSWA that has a connection to Bryan Danielson. The old, we heard all about the American Dragon when he was probably 19. So
we'll get there, as the famous saying goes.
We'll get there.
Well, how did you get into e-wrestling? I was say, how did you find it? But I don't know how you.
Yeah, I created it. Yeah,
that seems to be the prevailing rumor. No,
that's not the rumor. You would deeply offend several people by that. Well, so
that's not hard to do, I assure you.
Well, yeah, trust me. I'm old enough now that that's just water off a duck's back, right? If I offend somebody, I either apologize or move on or both. and we just go from there. Ask Pete Russo how many times I've offended him over the years. He will name every one for you. He will detail it. He'll have chat logs. He'll have everything.
I'll make sure it's not a busy day in my schedule.
Yeah. So my buddy Steve Thomas, and I, Steve, who I mentioned earlier, we watched wrestling. We would go to the shows when we could, things like that. So I was 12, he was 13. It's a rainy day in like March or something, 1988. So that far ago. And we're sitting there, nothing to do, can't go outside and do anything. This is before the internet, folks. Can't just hop on, right? There's nothing on TV.
Did you check your cell phone?
Yeah. No cell phones, none of that. So we're sitting there in my room, and we're looking at wrestling magazines, right? Because he'd go out and get a magazine from the store, and I'd get one when we were allowed, and go through and start to look. And there were these play-by-mail games, and you've heard Bronk and others, I'm sure, talk about those, right? But I tried to find it. I went through this big bin of stuff I have, and I found some old magazines, but I couldn't find one that had it in it. But it'd be a page ad, and it would have, hey, you can, create a wrestler and compete against other people and this and that. And so it would have a form you could fill out to put your name. My older brother actually filled it out, which annoyed me because I'm like, why did you fill it out? You're not going to play this thing. But you would fill it out, and you would fill in a certain number of moves. And then you would send it into them with some money. Yeah. Right. And then they would presumably send you back, results or whatever it would be. Well, we're sitting there. We don't want to fill out something and send it away and have to wait for it to come back, and certainly not pay any money, right? We're not putting money in the mail to be able to do this. I think I lost your video, but no worries.
Oh,
where it froze. But, so we were, so we were looking for something to do. So we just decided to make our own version. So we take this move list that they have, and we start adding to it with all these moves we know, and we start, trying to come up with this whole list of moves we can think of, and come up with, 150 or 200 moves. And then we start thinking about, well, how could we create a wrestler, and how could we get them to compete against each other? And all of a sudden we have like his brothers, or I had some old like Dungeons and Dragons dice or something, right? So like, we could use these. So basically we put together this game. We refined it a little bit. It would never stand up next to one of Warren Fitzpatrick's games. But it was a cool little dice game. We would build character sheets, and we just started cranking out these character ideas. And then it was like, okay, well, we have to have a tournament to figure out who the world champion is. And, then it just became every time we would connect on the weekends or whatever, we would have another card, then it became, hey, we're going to build up to a pay-per-view, and go from there. So that's really how it started. And a lot of it started with, Hornet and Mark Wyndham, right? Who was Barry Windham's cousin, and the CS Express, and, the Indian Warriors, who were based on the old Youngbloods tag team, and, people that were based off of video game characters or whatever it would be. And then we'd build silly characters, or we'd build others that, as we went forward that we thought were cool. And we just started putting them against each other and seeing what would happen. And the big news that people don't realize is Hornet was not the first world champion. He lost.
Oh, he did.
He lost in the tournament. And Joey Melton, who was our Ric Flair guy, was the winner, and he should have been. But yeah, he ended up winning, and Hornet didn't even win the U.S. title originally. He had to beat one of the Youngbloods or one of the Indian Warriors to do that. So anyway, that was how we got started. And then we'd get a couple friends, and we'd show them, and they weren't as into it as we were, but they'd play with us and create Reyes Cornette, right? Or create the Boulevard Warriors, or whoever it might be. And we'd play there, and then we'd create more cards. And then we started basically writing segments. So we'd write role play, or we'd have our friend write. I think I posted on Twitter several months ago, here's a Reyes Cornette role play that's literally handwritten out,
a notebook.
Hey, Hornet, I'm this or that. So that's how it sort of started and went on that way. We started to get tired of it maybe in 1991 or coming into 1992, and looking for, other ways to what could we do, or how could we get other people involved, not just the two of us.
And so you create this game, you're playing with your friends, and you're looking to expand. In 1992, what is the next step? What is bigger than your friends?
So 1992, internet still doesn't exist yet. Play by mail stuff, we see it in the wrestling mags, but really don't know anybody that plays it or how it works or what it is. To us, it just looks like one of those chain letters you get where it's like, hey, send $5 to all these people.
Yeah.
So, but I will say, had we been involved in that, we clearly would have beat Bronk.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been no contest.
I think it's suffice to say everybody would have beaten Bronk.
Everybody would have beat Bronk, right? They would have paid extra to sit in their strat or whatever it is. So Steve's dad is like the early adopter of all technology, right? Okay. So it literally was like March, April again. It's like that time. It's cold and rainy in North Carolina. There's not much to do. Well, his dad had gotten access to an online bulletin board called Prodigy. So back in the day, most of the people that listen to this will know what that is. Some won't. But back in the day, you had message boards like Prodigy, AOL, CompuServe. There were a few others. And before you got CDs in the mail from AOL every week, you'd go on your dial-up, you'd listen to the modem scream, right? And you go from there. So we'd get on his dad's computer because he had a modem, he had access to this. And we just started looking around these message boards. And of course, we go to the sports message boards because Steven's all into baseball and he's looking at that. And then we look and we're like, well, there's nothing about wrestling on here until we go to the other category. And when we get into the other category, all of a sudden, there's people talking, most of the people in there are talking about wrestling. And then we get into, I don't even remember at this point, they changed later. But then we see that there are people on there that are doing their own version of sort of what we're doing. Okay. Right? They have their own game or whatever it is. Now, it wasn't a dice game like we had. And for the most part, I don't remember how the few of them that were on there were set up, right? But the other part of that board, if you think about Twitter these days, Twitter is sort of the new age short form version of the old message boards because it's just all about fandom, and in some cases the worst side of fandom. Right? Because you look at Brian Alvarez will post the ratings, or somebody will post the ratings, and there's this huge uproar about
either you're happy or you're upset. Yeah.
Well, it was that, but in long form. Like it was long treatises we would sit and write back to each other about why WCW was better or why WWF was awful, and talking about people would talk about what was going on in Japan or all this other things, but people don't realize. If you look at the folks that are in, so take Ben Halcomb, right? Ben Halcomb, referee, he's gotten into producing video and this network for, who is it? FSW and
FSW.
Some others. Yeah. Are they a sponsor, right?
They're a sponsor of the show.
I know how to plug the sponsors.
Future Stars of Wrestling. Check it out, fswnetwork.com.
.com, right? So Gabe Sapolsky was on those boards. Right, Gabe Sapolsky went to work for ECW because of his connection on those boards. Dave Prazak was on those boards. He went to the
IWC Mid-South,
the Eddie Gilbert memorial show that he just posted on Twitter. I'm pretty sure I don't know if Mike Johnson was on those boards or if that came later when we talk about One Wrestling. But there were a bunch of other people that were on those boards that ended up getting connected to wrestling, and a lot that I'm sure I don't remember. But we sort of carved out this other side, right? This fantasy wrestling side. And Bob Ryder ran, so Bob Ryder of WCW Live and later TNA co-founder fame, eventually ran the wrestling message board, created a fantasy wrestling area and put us in charge of it because he was making money off of it, right?
And I remember hearing of Prodigy chats with Bob Ryder.
So Bob, we would get in trouble because he'd get mad. He'd get mad because we'd call out Heyman for not having a TV deal and lying about a TV deal. We'd get in big trouble, dude. It was quite something. But to take a step back, so we get online and we're like, well, we think we could do this on Prodigy. And so we're like, well, let's just start messaging people and see if there's any interest. Well, this is so far back, Mikey, that you had to pay for email. Over 30 messages a month, you had to pay a quarter for every email.
Every
So we
email
went
after
for
that.
every email. So we went to his dad and said, listen, we'll give you some money, but we're going to be sending out some emails. So we sent out about 70 emails to everybody on that board we could find. And then what we did is we were in the middle of starting what we called the Ultra Title Tournament. So we'd been running that our own since '89. So we brought that to the boards. Only a couple of people were actually in that tournament that were from the boards, but the spectacle of this 64-person tournament, and we're posting results on the boards. And back then, results were a paragraph, and we would actually post the score of what the game result was.
Right.
And so all of a sudden we got more people involved. We started building role play into it, and it was sort of off to the races there for a long time. So if you go in the CSWA archives at thecswa.com, there are all these text files that are pulled from Prodigy to make up, these old cards from, I think we've got them going back to around 94, something like that.
Incredible. Yeah.
But they're all back there.
That's awesome. TheCSWA.com.
That's it.
Yeah. Just so we get that clearly. So you're doing a dice game with your friends. How does it turn? You said you introduce role play, you do stuff like that. How do you introduce those things? How do you do that on a message board and get people to, I guess, switch up the way not only you and your friends are playing, but get new people to do it?
Yeah, so that was the interactive part, right? Which was, if we were just doing the dice game, then it was just like those play-by-mail feds where you saw the results, but you didn't really have any interaction with other people. You could send in strats or different things, but you couldn't tell what was going on.
You couldn't do a promo, per se.
Right, and so all of a sudden we have all these people that want to interact with each other. And so we're going, well, we'll build in role play, and we'll have people role play for their matches. We'll tell them, hey, we're still doing the dice fed thing, but this is how you get interactivity. And the more active you are, right, the more we'll
the
start
higher you'll be on
engage, right? So I mean, it's basically pretending, it's fantasy booking stuff, but with people that are putting in effort. So we started doing that, and we held on to the dice thing for a long time. There are a lot of people that would always challenge us. The Hornet Wins thing probably started sometime back then. I don't know how far back. I don't know who to blame for that one other than Tommy Siegel. But we would do that. Hornet, by the way, was the champion. He had been the champion when we came over to Prodigy. But the other thing that happened is all these other little federations would pop up. Now all of a sudden there was this opportunity not just to have a federation to have members that were engaged with each other, but to engage with other promotions and federation. Yeah. So this interleague stuff would start, right? And there'd be these groups of leagues that would get together. And, we created one that would then have a super league champion or, a universal champion or whatever it would be. And so that's where we literally used Hornet to go around to every one of those little federations, and he would win their title. So we'd go and talk to the Fed head. He'd win the title, and we just started merging all these titles. And so the name of the belt changes from CSWA World to a number of different things. But eventually, you've got like 35 titles over time racked up between different things, and you have this unified world championship. And so, that became a thing on those boards as well, and lots of contention about that. And of course, at one time, just like the Popes, there were two unified titles because some people want to break off and do their own thing and all that. But it was just a cool way to build the broader community, get people, engaged in something, and not just, fighting about ratings or fighting about, hey, you screwed me when I was in this fed and I hate you forever.
Which still exists today.
Still exists.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you start, you have everybody joining in, you're introducing role play, you're changing the game, so to speak. Where do we go from here? How do you get bigger than what you are on Prodigy?
Well, so Prodigy had its limits, right? AOL started to become the big thing.
Yep.
I was never deeply involved over in the AOL community. What was it called? The Arena. But it was much more chat based. There certainly were leagues, but never heard of any of note coming out of there. The internet was just in its beginnings. If you think about 1994, I mean, we had a web page going back to 1994 on Prodigy.
Yeah.
And we actually built one for Ryder on there for the wrestling forum and all that sort of stuff. Well, all of a sudden, just like your cell phone plans today, well, not today, but 20 years ago, they started wanting to charge by the minute or by the text or by whatever.
Yep.
Well, Prodigy and AOL and all those folks wanted to start to do that too. So they said, well, we're going to give you a certain number of free hours, but then you're going to pay by the hour. Right. And so we were able to wrangle some free accounts out of Bob Ryder, but you see the level of engagement drop off because you have these people that are not going to write. There are people staying on here writing role play. You can't write the role play unless you're actually on the service.
Oh, so you're wasting time while you're doing it.
On there. So it starts to die out. Bob Ryder sees that it's dying out, and he's like, listen, I got to do something differently here. So by now we're in 1996 going into 1997. And he's like, I want to set up a website. And we're like, oh, okay. And he's like, hey, you guys set up this other crappy website, for Prodigy. Do you think you could build a website? And we're like, well, probably, right? We're like 20 and dumb, and sure, we can do whatever. We can go beg, borrow, and steal, the crappy graphics that we all had back in 1996 and all that. So basically, 1997, we shut down the CSWA, we leave Prodigy, and we start OneWrestling.com for Bob Ryder as the webmaster, so to speak. Bob was ahead of his time in some ways in that he tried to get people to pay for memberships before the internet trusted that or had ways to do that, or thought that everything should be free. So it never was the money maker, at least for us. Now, it was a good money maker for Bob, and more importantly, he positioned it to get himself a job at WCW.
Yep.
And Bob has passed recently, and he was an interesting guy, right? Bob was an incredibly nice guy as long as you weren't waiting to get paid by him. If you're waiting to get paid, then you might get a little annoyed. But we went down, to go back to real wrestling, so to speak. We went down and saw Hulk Hogan turn heel and become a member of the NWA, down at Bash at the Beach, because Bob was like, yeah, come on, I'll get you tickets, and slot you in. And, and that was part of it too. At that age, we could travel. We started going to more real events. We went to a lot of, Starcades or Halloween Havocs or, that sort of thing. So that was really fun to get to sneak backstage. We would convince, what was Doug's last name? The head of security for WCW, whatever Doug's last name was. We would tell him that I was Bob Ryder's nephew, and we would get backstage until they'd kick us out. But anyway, back to fantasy wrestling. So we launched OneWrestling.com, and then in 1998 we launched FantasyWrestling.com, and we had some connections to One Wrestling and their message board. So that was a way to get a lot of members. At one point, I think we probably had 2,500 people bouncing around the boards before there were spam memberships. Now, not all those people in any way were active, but, so it started out as FantasyWrestling.com, which is moving the CSWA over, and then it became creating message boards so that other people could host feds. We could bring our Prodigy friends over. We could meet new people who hadn't been on Prodigy who wanted to start up feds. And so you've heard about a lot of those. You've heard about Eric Ziba's GXW that becomes Bronx EPW, and the NFW that was famous for a long time with Cats, and Jamar Nicholas that was phenomenal, and all the other acronyms that you can go back in the archives on the F Wrestling message boards, and you can see all that stuff archived if you want to go read about really old stuff. But that was interesting, and so we started up there. We still had this connection with One Wrestling. By the way, that's how I met Travis Bevan before we actually knew we were both in fantasy wrestling. So before I knew he,
you met him in real life.
Before he knew, well, we met virtually, but he was helping with some server issues with Bob's stuff. So before I knew he was the FWO guy, and before he knew I was the CSWA guy, we met and have stayed connected every once in a while.
Small world, yeah.
That's a cool guy. So anyway, so we brought it over there and sort of restarted in '98 in a lot of ways. And so, we got access to a lot of new people. That's when Warren of Deacon fame comes in, Eddie Love, Eric Ziva comes in with Kevin Powers, Steve Ratter, Brian Wade comes in with K9, Mark Vizzacchero with Vizak, Andy Bloxham you've heard of from Zero,
Yep.
Ventolo, a bunch of people, and then followed by, others. Poor Jamar Short told you about how I kept him on the wait list for like 2 years because I never saw his application. And I still feel bad about that. Mike Dove, who was famous for Ken Hiroshi and others, he's the guy who is childhood friends with Brian Danielson and would update us on his buddy. In fact, there was another friend, Evan Aho, who was in there. Jason Martin, Jamar Nicholas, Tom Ford comes along, later, well after 1998. But I knew of Tom from the old FWL net day, IWO FWL net days, right? Because they were the big website, Jamie Kasoy and that sort of thing. They were the big website until, that sort of went down from there.
Almost a who's who of e-wrestling throughout the last 20 years just popped up.
Well, and so later, right? So CSWA, certainly known for its hiatuses, and how that would go. But the fun thing became, and going back to Hornet wins, right? So the first time we broke the dice barrier, so to speak, was to take the belt off Hornet. So we go into one of these Super League things on Prodigy, and we're like, listen, Hornet created this thing. He's about to defend it. We cannot have him
win it again.
Keep going.
Retain it.
Keep having this thing. People will just lose their stuff. And so, we're like, I don't remember if we actually rolled it out or if we were like, just screw it. We're going to, before we knew what angling it was, we're going to angle it.
Yeah.
So we did. And in 98, and that 98's one, going back as I was sort of thinking and preparing for this, and I won't remember half of anything. Anybody I leave out or get names wrong or whatever it is, I'm sorry. But I went back to look at that 98 period because the story in the CSWA was they were going national. So we had gone way back and we had actually written a version of the first card for the CSWA. And it's this, it's this funny thing where Chad and Steve are in this warehouse. The thing's named the CSWA. You don't learn until basically the very last CSWA card why that is.
Why it is.
So you can suspect. But it comes into play later. But, we go national. And so the very first card is, hey, we've got these big famous CSWA names and stories from a year ago that we can bring back. The Mike Randalls and the Guns and the Eli Flair and these big names that are there. And Merritt, when I talk about Merritt, that's the figurehead of the CSWA, Merritt or Thomas, right? And so he comes out and he's like, oh, I'm going to make this huge match for the CSWA world title. And it's Hornet, I think, versus Guns. Well, it's a schmoz, right? It ends up, there are run-ins. The
match doesn't end. Yeah.
Right. So we get away with the schmoz, and Hornet Guns had been the big feud of the previous 2 or 3 years. And so then the next card is, hey, we're going to take the two Wyndhams, Mark and Troy Wyndham, who, by the way, Greg Gethard, one of the best writers in the sport. He's back in Defiance as you grin. I know you have now officially met Greg, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Online at least. Greg is one of the most creative people there is. And so he had Troy Wyndham, who was a character we had created, but he said, hey, you're not really doing anything. I think I can do something with that guy. And we're like, yeah, go ahead. So he takes him, and you've got Mark Wyndham and Troy Wyndham, who, by the way, Mark and Hornet were tag team partners in the early CSWA. They're buddies. They're America's team, right, to steal from the Cowboys. But now they've been pulled apart. And so you get Hornet and Guns, who are blood feud enemies. Guns had actually put Hornet out of the CSWA in a career match a few years earlier. Now you've got Mark and Troy Wyndham, and now it's a tag team match, with whoever gets the pin wins the title.
Okay. It's an interesting stipulation. Yeah.
You got these 4 huge matches. Well, listen, nobody likes those matches. Nobody wants to see a tag team match that's 4 a world
with one
championship,
champion.
right? You
Yeah.
want one guy to win. Well, we know that, and so it's a bigger schmoz, right? It's a bigger, hey, there's no finish, there's no this and that. And the whole idea of that was to get to where we could get the newbies settled, right, with a couple matches under their belt in 2, 3, 4 cards, and then set up a big tournament they could all be in for the world title. And
So
Hornet
yeah,
did that tournament,
the
right?
idea everything ends in a schmoz leading up to we can narrow this down with a tournament.
Leading right. And then so Hornet makes it to the final 4, but he loses to the big new star, Hurricane Eddie Love. Right. And and Love is there. He wins the title. You've got these new guys in this final 4 that can make their name, and that's where you get Deacon later coming up the next year. You get Steve Ratter, you get some of these other folks that go off, and then so Hornet really became, so I ran Hornet, but I also sort of ran Merritt, right?
Okay.
So he's the figurehead. And what people also need to know is, I know that is such a lame, what's the word I'm looking for? Not archetype, but it's such a lame angle now that you have an evil owner.
Yeah, a trope.
We did it before Vince, well before Vince, right? There's this story in the CSWA going back to Merritt and Thomas and Cornette.
Yeah.
Over ownership. Right. So we originally have this wheel of death match that Pete talks about ad nauseum, which we still steal from Kevin Sullivan. It's a 3-tiered cage, but the whole idea is you got to get to the top of these cages. You have to strap your opponents into this wheel. And when 3 people are strapped into the wheel, it's going to start spinning with fireworks and fire and everything else. You are going to get injured if you're strapped into this wheel. And by the way, you could have 2 guys from one team and 1 guy from another strapped in the wheel. Didn't matter. It just started going. So your goal was to not get strapped in the wheel and hopefully get another guy. But, so this is like, I don't know, 90, 91, 92, where we're having this ownership angle from Reyes Cornette versus the CSWA powers that be in, Hornet and Wyndham. We can call them that. We're not Russo. But, so that goes back there. And so, we played with those guys for a long time. And so sometimes they'd be evil. Sometimes they'd be against each other. Sometimes one would be crazy. One would leave, right, or get bought out. And that became...
back in these days, there was no evil owner. Every owner or every figurehead, every commissioner you ever saw was just your goofy guy in a tie, glasses. Yeah. I'm here from the commission. I'm here to set things straight.
Yep. And they might come out and get mad about some, Dusty got his arm broken and I'm going to come
dastardly
out and
heel stuff
about it, or there's going to be some sort of stipulation.
But they're always a baby face.
Yes. And so our guys start out as baby faces, but they morph into, hey, wait a minute, we don't like Hornet, or we don't like Wyndham, or we don't like Eli Flair, or we don't like each other, right? And it becomes this issue. Well, one of the long-standing pieces of that was this ridiculous ongoing angle between Merritt and Thomas and one of the announcers named Sammy Benson. Okay. And Sammy is the lush, right? He's the Bobby Heenan. I mean, he's literally intended to be Bobby Heenan. He is incredibly smart. He's entertaining, and he's half the time incredibly inappropriate, right? So, and he's just there to be there for the heels and all this sort of stuff. Well, I think there's a question in there, and I will use this word knowing it's not politically correct, but they were literally the old version of this word previously. CSWA had a problem with midgets.
And Brian asked that question.
Yeah. So they originally come in as this joke with these joke characters. There's another Wyndham brother that was it's almost like Undertaker and Kane, right? He's almost left to fend for himself. He basically is still a child. He's in love with the Muppets. He has a little Kermit doll. He comes to the CSWA. We find out he's related to Mark, who wants nothing to do with him, and he teams up with this other guy. and they get into this feud, and I'm getting all this wrong, and Pete will correct all this in show notes or on Discord or somewhere public, I'm sure. But there's this guy that comes back, and he was this a guy on Prodigy, and we stole his character basically. He went away for years at a time, so we thought it was fine. We're like, we'll just use his character. He's an established thing. His name's El Nino. Who's ever going to do anything with El Nino? Well, we basically make El Nino insane, and he's going after this Muppet Kid guy, right? Timmy Wyndham.
Yeah.
Well, Timmy Wyndham's friend apparently has friends that are from the circus, and they are 5 little people who call themselves the Mighty Morphin Power Midgets.
Oh, no.
And they get involved, and things go really, really bad, to the point that I don't know if it was Benson or Buckley, the other announcer, yells, "Get a black dot over that midget's face," because we think the midget has been killed. Because the Mighty Morphin Power Midgets try and Voltron up and like do like a human pyramid and form into something, and it goes horribly, horribly wrong.
I can smell the cancellation coming.
Yes. So, well, no, the cancellation literally comes later. But anyway, so then there becomes this running feud between Sammy Benson, the red midget of the Mighty Morphin Power Midgets, and somehow Merritt gets involved. And so every time we would leave on a hiatus, like half the time it would be related to that storyline. So we go on a hiatus one time, and we're like, Merritt was just arrested for killing the red midget. And literally when we come back, there's a Few Good Men scene of Merritt on the stand talking about, so what if I did? So what if I
can't handle the truth? Yeah.
You can't handle the truth. You need me on that wall. He didn't kill him, by the way. And he would come back over and over again to wreak havoc.
Well, you need that story next time.
Yeah. But it feeds into Hornet because we have this big event called Fish Fund, right? It's something we made when we were 12 people. That was an ongoing thing. It was in this big arena in Sweetwater, Texas. We have this giant card. It was the biggest card we had at that point. Well, in between the matches on this card, there are these backstage segments where basically Benson and the Red Midget and Merritt are all like chasing each other, right? They're all after each other to end this once and for all. Well, it ends up with, it dovetails with another story where the Muppet Kid is in love with Terry Melton, sister of Joey Melton, who was once inappropriately called Miss Hooters. She won a title, I guess. But he's now in love with her. He doesn't know where she is. She runs back into the building. Everybody's been evacuated because there's an issue with the building. Well, the issue is Merritt and Thomas and the Red Midget, or Merritt and Buck Benson and the Red Midget, names don't matter at this point to anybody, are in the boiler room and they're having it out.
Okay.
So Hornet goes, hey, to his brother, hey, Mark, aren't you going to run in there and stop him? Because he's going to like get blown up. And Mark's like, I don't care about him. What are you talking about? He's just some weird kid. I know. So Hornet runs back in there. And of course, as Hornet runs back in, part of the building explodes and we go black. And we find out, or actually we go black after we see Hornet is under some rubble or whatever. So we never went full FWO and really killed anybody off. Like nobody was getting shot or anything.
Yeah.
Or full asylum, which was a whole lot worse than
where shot was light. FWO.
Yeah. But anyway, so that would become an overarching theme that we would weave into the CSWA. And part of that was just fun for us. And part of it was we would actually bring in other characters to be a little part of sort of this enterprise-wide storyline that might be going on, to give them a rub or to integrate that and move that through. So that stuff was always fun to do.
So Brian's question is, no, but really, what's the deal with all those midgets?
You got to go back and read it. You got it. I'll have to get back on Twitter. I was on for a whole 3 months before I bailed.
He's got more notebook pages, guys.
Yeah, I'll have to get back on there and pull the reading list for what you need to know about the CSWA and the Mighty Morphin Power Midgets.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, fun stuff. So 1998 to probably 2001, probably one of, if not my favorite times of the CSWA and FWrestling.com, because we had so many new people coming in. We had so much cool stuff going on.
Well, it sounds like it. Not only you're expanding, you're creating the first, independent website, IntraFed, and it sounds like you are giving space to other places, and it's all an opportunity for CSWA to grow, but other people to get involved.
Yeah, it was. And, we gave up, I think, pretty early on in F Wrestling. We didn't really do the IntraFed thing at that point. It was like, everybody do your own thing. We may have run the unified title around a couple things, but we started doing more events. And
Okay.
so, we might do Ultra Title, or we might do events that would tie back into CSWA stuff where we try and pull people in. So, Ultra Title was always a fun one. We did one time with the CSWA called Gold Rush. So the idea of Gold Rush was you had 4 different battle royals that were going on in 4 different rings. So if you think about the number 5 on a dice, you had 5 rings, right? So they're giving up a lot of the gate, Mikey, to get all the gold.
Too much floor space.
The 4, so 3 of the 4 all 4 champions had to defend their title, but it was an open invitation. So it was like the Ultra Title. We would invite whoever wanted to come in. So we ended up having, 40 or 50 guys in there. And then you'd end up with, hey, here's a new Greensboro champion, or here's a new United States champion. And then at the end, Dan Ryan would have to get in the middle ring with whoever came out of all that, right? Well, actually, that's not true. With the people that came out of each ring, then Dan Ryan had to defend his title in one final battle royal.
Okay, so it's 4 winners plus the champion.
Yeah, I think we did top 2 from each ring or something like that, but I forget exactly how it worked. But that was fun stuff, and thankfully we didn't have to pretend to do a dice game on that one, because we did figure out ways to do dice for like Wheel of Death and Firehouse and all kinds of fun stuff.
I'm sure Brunk will tell us about that one.
Yeah, Brunk had to live in the dice era. I don't know if the Ego Buster would have survived that 30-sided die. He might have gotten messed up.
Well, I think what the dream podcast is now to get you and Brunk and Russo all in one shot.
That would be scary. Yeah, that would be scary.
We'll throw in Brian for continuity and see what happens.
Brian will throw in there as well. But we do events like that. We did Iron Man of Champion events, which are basically like the G1, right? So we take champions from multiple federations and have them actually do round robin, and that was fun, because you had to figure out how, if you're Ghetto and you're booking the G1, you can start from the end and you can work your way back.
Yeah.
But unless you're in an angle fed, you can't do that, right? So you have to come up with all these alternative things on, well, if this happens, how might I end this match so that the points total and that sort of stuff, would change. And, that was a big change, I would say, around that time too, which was the rise of the angle fad. When we first, if you'd gone on AOL or Prodigy early on, you would have had what we called simmed feds, like dice, or using one of the simulation, I forget the big one, TNW or what it was called.
TNM.
TNM.
Zeus Pro,
Zeus Pro, that's right. Or you might have what we would call a real wrestler fad, right? Which is, okay, I'm Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah, that was my intro.
They would use pick bait, and there's nothing wrong with those. But the other thing we had to think about, so we didn't really let those on F Wrestling because there were concerns about copyright. Mm-hmm. So at various points, WWE, WWF would send out cease and desist letters to websites saying, "Hey, you can't use, you can't use these images." And so these days, I see some of that as I look around. When I look around, and I'm like, why are you guys still doing that? It's weird to go pull somebody's Instagram and like be posting hot babe pictures as if, I'm like, that feels like catfishing at its, ultimate. You're not even catfishing at that point. You're just like, okay, I'm going to steal this person's pictures to pretend to be a wrestler.
Now you're role playing their life.
Yes. And so I love the people and the fact that they role play. I just wish they could do it without the weird pictures. And then you post them on Twitter, which I don't understand.
You're playing a person behind the character who's also a wrestler and going through real life stuff now.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where obviously we got into Poser some, learning from FWO and those guys. Micros, are cool. Other people have done hand drawn, or animated stuff, which I think is cool to give your fan the credibility that, hey, this is a character that someone has developed, right?
Yes.
That they've thought about and they put time and effort into. Because back in the day, we'd have people that would steal role plays,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
They'd go on F Wrestling and then they'd go to some other, GeoCities site and they'd post Pete's role play there, and just change the names,
Yeah.
except they miss, Poison Ivy, and be like, yeah, that's clearly not your role play. But yeah, big changes back from the pre-internet days to the internet days to then, what I would sort of call the angle days. And now you know better than I do, right? When I go on some of the discords or the interfeds or web circles that there are now, there's lots of cool different ideas. I mean, there's one where they created their own island.
Yes,
I forget what it's
Wrestle
called.
World.
Wrestle World, right? Which it's really far out. And there have always been really far out leagues, right?
Yep.
But
Asylum was one of them.
but what a cool concept, right? To go and say, hey, no, we have this world and it had, where it has different places or islands or things and different things happen there. It's pretty cool. I haven't gone through and read their cards.
It's taking fantasy wrestling to that fantasy world. You can do anything you want. There's no limitations.
Yeah, it is, and you always had groups like that. So if you think about when F Wrestling came around, you had Usenet for people that have any idea what that was. So there were user groups. So if you've ever heard of rec.sport.wrestling.fantasy, is that RSPWL? So these were message boards that were not tied to Prodigy or AOL or whatever. But if you were in your college computer lab, you could log on. It was all text based, and it was basically Reddit. Let me put it that way. It's basically Reddit before Reddit. And so you had a group of leagues there, I think, that came out of there called the Summit Leagues. That was a whole interfed and a grouping of leagues there. You had Primetime Central, right, which you get Lindsay and a bunch of other people from. Primetime Central tended to lean more toward the fantasy aspect, I would say, right? You get into some of the later days of that, and you're getting like vampires and stuff like that. So that was never quite my bailiwick, although I just told you a long story about midgets and
to be fair, Gangrel is fanging and banging to this day.
He's great, right? He's got his podcast. He was almost on AEW a few weeks ago, whatever. But so you had different groups like that, and then you started to have the rise of sort of the individual website for a promotion that may or may not be connected to anybody else.
So yeah, it's cool. And for me, I wasn't a part of the circle back in that day. I was on those GeoCities and those Angel Fire sites. I was one of those weirdos. But when it came down to it, I heard of Ultra Title before I heard of the CSWA, before I heard of F Wrestling. I always heard of Ultra Title, the big tournament.
Yeah.
So what is Ultra Title and what made it unique in those days?
Nothing made it unique.
It was just a interfed tournament.
Yeah. I mean, what made it unique was we had the ability to pull in, to get people hyped up and pull in a bunch of people. There's nothing special about the tournament.
And you said it was a 64-person tournament?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
So, yeah, again, go on Twitter and you'll see the 256-person one that we did. Right? But 1989, we're like, hey, let's just put everybody in a tournament.
Yeah.
And I don't remember I think we did 32 back then. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did, because we ended up naming a guy number 32, Russ Jackson, because he got a win and nobody expected him to, right? He was like he's like the 16 seed in the NCAAs who, goes on a run. And so we did that again to entertain ourselves, and then we make it bigger. And then I'd get these big art notepads, and that's, I think, what I posted a picture of, and we'd make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And so 92, we bring that online and we get people interested. And I don't remember, I'd have to go back and look. I know I've got it detailed on F Wrestling somewhere. But, how many of those we ran as part of the CSWA. And then when we were going to come back one time, or before we came back, Steve's idea always was, listen, we're never going to have enough time to run the CSWA. It's even the way we used to run it. We never ran it as a weekly fed. It was never intended to be that way, except maybe in the early days.
When it was you and your friends.
It was more about the breadth and depth of the content than it was about pushing it out week by week or whatever it was. So, it gave people time to go to other feds or do whatever. But we were like, well, let's pull Ultra Title out and we'll use that and we'll get interest. But I guess the last one we did, how long ago was that? Was it 13, 14? Was it before that? 2012? I don't know. But that was a big one where I said, hey, let's bring this back. I'm going to put money on the line.
Yep.
Right. And it was really, F wrestling was in a down period as it is now. And the idea was, listen, we can bolster some interest, not only with the guys that are here, but if I spend time going out to these other places and I get people really excited about it, then we can get them introduced to F wrestling, have them go through Ultra Title. Only, if you do that one was 128 characters. We had about 100 people that actually signed up, and then we filled in the rest with just extras, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, half those people are going to lose in the first round, right? So the idea is, how do you get them to have a good experience, and then to look at these feds that are on the site, which the CSWA was not open at that point.
Yeah.
Right. We were doing it for the NFWs.
It's almost, promotion for your guys.
Yeah. And so, we got a lot of play after. We got a lot of the old guys that came back. Andy Bloxham came back and started a whole, to do, because there are people who are like, well, I can't respond to his role plays. He didn't do a trash talk role play. Nobody said you had to do a trash talk role play, buddy.
It's a lot of styles clash.
It was a lot of styles clash. And, so the joke was survive in advance. Right. And so, that was fun. And Pete and Ford and others really took the brunt of that, because I wasn't able to finish it up. Starting in about 2010, long story, but my mom started having major health issues from some accidents. Then she went through cancer twice, over the last 10 years and stuff like that. So, you get in the middle of that. And I think right in the middle of Ultra Title was when she got her first cancer diagnosis. And so it was like, okay, this isn't important right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so
right.
Pete still blames me for leaving him, in the lurch as I did, but he did a phenomenal job finishing it up. And in that, and so there were people that built events around that, right, that either were part of Ultra Title or weren't. You had leagues that, said, hey, we want you
the feds within F wrestling would build like pay-per-view events around it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that was fun, and that got a lot going. And that was sort of the last big CSWA run. It wasn't a big run, but we finished up this big story that had been going on before I had to leave, when my mom had her first accident, which by the way, tied up all those loose ends, like the midget and Sammy Benson and the name of the federation. And in essence, what we find out is Merritt and Thomas don't own it anymore. We think we know who owns it, but then we find out we're not sure, and it's just in limbo. And so then we came back. Hornet and Poison Ivy are now the owners. They used to be an item. They're not an item anymore. Ivy has now, been married for a long time to Triple X, to Stevens, and has kids. And if you've read the book, By Pete's Book, you get the background of all that sort of stuff. So that was fun. We did that for a little while, and then I think that led us to maybe my mother's second cancer diagnosis. And then Pete came back and said, hey, I'd like to take a shot at this. And he made it one whole card. So so what I will say is, even if I had some abrupt or short runs, I didn't have any runs as short as Pete Russo's CSWA run.
One card, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good deal. Well, CSWA, after it ceased to exist, Ultra Title remained for just a little bit. What is the legacy for you guys? What is the legacy of the CSWA, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's tied in with F wrestling, and all that sort of stuff. I think, the legacy for me, obviously, is we've got all these people that, I have no doubt if I sort of flew the CSWA flag again today, that there would be people that I haven't talked to in 10 years that would show up and would be like, I'm in. What do you need? Right? Jamar Short, who I don't talk with, right? We interact on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever it may be. Jamar is such a good guy. And I don't know how he does anything with 4 girls and all the stuff that he's a great father. Um, but I don't know. But I know he'd be like, what can I do? Right. Yeah. Even though you left me on a wait list for 3 years or 2 years or whatever it was, what could I do? And so that, that's nice. There's also the scary part of, well, what if people don't show up? Right. Or what if we do something and people don't show up? And so I think there's that's scary, but I also know that hasn't happened. And so, why think about that happening? I'll still do it. I'll still think the worst, but why not? So, you think about the legacy of some of these guys and the connections, Ford, Russo.
These guys still going today, still running feds today.
Still going. Ford's running Defiance. Russo's doing whatever Russo's doing. Greg Gethard got the itch, which, by the way, Greg Gethard's the only one to ever write a mainstream article that I'm aware of on fantasy wrestling.
There you go.
If you haven't seen that, I have the link somewhere. I'll have to send you. It's just it's pretty incredible. I know that if I called Travis, even though we're not buddies, right? But if I called Travis, is like, hey, could you help me out with something? He would do his best if he could. Right, if he wasn't right in the middle of something. And there's a lot like that. And that community, the community was once, well, I don't know how big it is now.
It's still, the community is still great.
Yeah, it's hard to tell when you start to look outside of sort of, this circle or that circle, but there's really cool circles out there that hopefully have younger players in there as well. And that's one of the things we always pushed on too as part of the legacy was the CSWA was, it was sort of Southern wrestling, right? It was, hey, we're going to limit cussing until we all got much older, because the idea was we could have kids that were coming on that message board and were joining up.
Sure.
We didn't want to, right? We didn't want to run them off, although I'm sure some people did, and we did have kids early on. We were all kids.
When I started e-wrestling, I was 12 years old.
Yeah. So so I think that, and then you look at the other connections with other circles and things like that. You look at PTC, you look at FWO and CWL, right? I mean, you had this whole group of FWO gets basically a restart and a revamp because all these CSWA guys go over there. Yeah. Right. Russo goes over there, and Jamar goes over there, and Warren, goes over there, and all of a sudden,
when I think of the FWO, the Fed I associate most with it is CSWA, just because the names crisscross so often.
Yeah, and they never interacted, right? There was never any kind of inter-Fed play, anything like that. But similar guys that came up and that made their sort of made their legacy and then expanded it, and got to interact with great guys like, and I won't try and pull names because I'll get them all wrong, but Flying Frenchie and
Kevin, yes,
Kevin, who I just listened to his podcast.
Very charming.
But guys who had sort of done their first run and maybe had left because of life or because they got tired of it, and then they came back and they're able to interact with all these new guys, and so I think that was. That's always the biggest part of the legacy is the connections and the people that you connect. I will say the other thing that I think one of the reasons that people would come back and would resonate with CSWA was because it wasn't an angle fed, right? We always used role play, but in a different way, right? So I think, do you grade role play in Classic?
I do, yeah. Well, we don't give it a number. We don't give it a grade. We just say, hey, A was better than B.
Right. But there are some feds like maybe HOW does this where people go in and they score.
Yeah, there's grades. There's number scores. Yes.
Right. And I can get that. I mean, HWO is phenomenal. They've always had an incredible website. Lee's an interesting guy from the little bit that I've
Yep.
interacted with
Shout
him.
out to SoulX for the website.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's right. And and Defiant, same thing. I'm glad Tom's there. I love Angry Justin, but you can only put up with those shenanigans. But
Hey, he's
so
in
much.
classic-wrestling.com right now.
That is terrific. I read your latest card, by the way. Very nice.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that very much.
I think hopefully he's a less angry guy. He's mellowed a little bit.
Oh,
I don't know if that's true.
He honestly, yeah, he gets a bad rap. He has been nothing but terrific in Classic. He's been full of ideas. He's written matches. He's been incredibly useful, both as booking. I mean, staff, match. He's writing role plays. He's giving up
That's
his character for angles. It's great.
He was always a good guy to me. He would blow up every once in a while. I don't even remember.
And that's the way Justin is. Everyone who knows Justin knows he's going to blow up. You just got to get past.
If you want to see that stuff, by the way, if you're Russo, there are secret files all over fwrestling.com where you can go see old chat logs and all kinds of stuff. I would only save the good ones. Right? I only save the ones where people would just lose their mind.
Those are the best. I love it.
Yeah.
Most of my friendships started with me bashing someone terribly.
Yeah, exactly. So there's plenty of archives. Well, I mean, look at Bronk, right? Bronk, you guys heard the story back on episode 20, whatever that was, a long time ago. His Fed basically screws over our world champion.
Yep.
Because he's annoyed that Evan is going to go focus on CSWA. Evan wins the CSWA World Championship. By the way, I don't know that Bronk's met Evan. Evan could take Bronk. Evan could take any one of us. He knows some of those moves from American Dragon, I'm pretty sure.
Bronk's a super dad. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Bronk's great. But it starts out, and that was not an interfed thing, right? We didn't know what was happening. But it leads into this, and I have some of those Bronk chats saved somewhere. In fact, I sent some of them to him, I think, earlier in the year. And he's like, "Oh, I wasn't as much of an asshole as I thought I was." I was like, "No, you really weren't."
Not as much as he is now.
We turn that into a thing, and then Bronk becomes, right, easily the longest reigning unified champion as we go through all our iterations and hiatuses and all that, right? So fun stuff like that. It's always good. But the thing that I think was different than sort of the judging of role play that way or whatever was there was always a surprise, right? And so I remember Russo would tell people, somebody would say, "I'm on a losing streak. I don't know why I'm doing this. Why am I doing this?" And he's like, "Listen, hang in there. You're being tested." Now, I don't know how, I don't know that all of that was always true. But there was this idea of, just like you would do in a real promotion, right? Yep. Is this guy injury prone?
Put a guy through a ringer. Yeah.
Can he hold up? And, I would always call it, sort of the wrench in the works, the monkey wrench, whatever you want to call it. Or somebody would come in and they would want to angle out the end of a match, and have it go exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's like, well, you're not the only guy in this match.
Yep.
So I can't guarantee you that you're going to get exactly that end you want, because there's another guy over here, and this might be part of an overarching story, right, where we're going to build something out. And so the idea always was, hey, how can we integrate that stuff? And then how can we keep people interested and engaged, knowing that somebody's going to get a little pissed off because they lost.
Every time.
Right? But at the same time, and I never got deeply into angle feds. I did a couple like Legion, and there was another one I can't remember. I don't remember if Aiden Campbell's fed WWR was angle at the time or not. But it's like, okay, well, if we're going to agree on a story together, that's interesting. But I never quite understood who people thought their audience was.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're FWO, you have a broader audience than your membership. But most leagues, your audience is your membership.
Right.
And so if
no one outside is reading.
If everybody knows what's going to happen, and they will, because there are no two guys in a fantasy wrestling or e-wrestling league that are going to keep quiet, right? They're going to be like, hey, I'm going over, or hey, I'm doing this, or hey, I want to include you in this. Everybody's going to know what happens before that card is posted. And so if the idea is, hey, look at this cool card we did, that's great, right? We all want that. But if 90% of your audience is the people participating, okay, everybody knew it was going to happen before you posted it.
But I would say that that's most of e-wrestling today, unfortunately.
And so that's where I think there is room for. Now here's the problem, and one of the secrets why the CSWA had so many hiatuses. That puts a lot of ownership on the owner, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be the one to make those decisions. You may have to be the one to write a lot of that stuff, because you can't just go. If Pete and Brunk are having a match, right? I may not want to ruin it for the two of them. So either I've got to write it, or I got to find somebody that's got to write it. I got to make sure that the voice is right. I've got to make sure, especially with those two guys, that if I'm engaging their characters all, that the voices of the characters are right. Because if I don't, I'll hear about it and they'll yell at me and they'll tell me you can't ever have my character stay in line again. And go from there. But what you get out of the end of that is you get anticipation of, hey, who's going to win this unified world title? Because we don't really know. I think I know, right? And you can look at the role play, but I think it was Kevin who mentioned this on his podcast. When you get at that level, the nuances between the role play are going to be relatively small, right? In a lot of cases, small. You can go either way. And then it does come down to, well, what's the angle? What's the story we're telling? What's the overarching element? Is it time for a title change because we need new matchups or we need new things here? And so you give yourself that leeway. And that's why people would say we never had character limits, and I get the reason for character limits, especially these days, but we never really had role play limits or character limits. It was like, tell your story, and some of it needs to be going head to head with the other guy. If you have an overarching story like Pete would or like Brunk would that you want to tell along with that, absolutely, right, do that too. But you can't just do that, right? You can't just do the zero role play. You got to have some that's going to be clashing with this guy, because that's what this is about.
You can't just do character development. You have to go head to head with somebody at some point to be competitive.
You got to put it in there and then go from there. But that led us to have a lot of cool moments, and that's the other thing that I would say is I've gone back and looked at the cards and reminded myself of things that happened long ago. There's some really cool stuff that happened that no one would have expected, or where we were able to take angles that guys wanted to do and see them from both sides, and then create something that was, I think in some cases even cooler. Now there are other cases where that didn't happen, or where we gave too much ownership to somebody, like the time John Katz had his character take a wooden stake and drill it through a guy's knee. And but we figured out how to take that and lead to a bunch of new stories, and tell the guy whose character just got decimated that, hey, we'll figure this out. Don't worry. We'll take care of you. Although that's the same guy that later we took his real life named character and we had a giant vat of poop fall down on his head and he got fired.
He didn't really take very good care of that guy.
Yelling, pooped, and fired. Well, he went to Duke. So if you've ever...
It all evens out.
If you've ever met anybody who went to Duke, and if you look in the background of my video, you'll see why going to Duke's a problem.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. Yeah.
Anyway, different colors of blue.
UNC. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Moving forward. So like I mentioned, CSWA legendary status, great run as a Fed. The Ultra title even outlasts that as far as in e-wrestling, and then F Wrestling. What was Fantasy Wrestling became F Wrestling and has prevailed through the years, and was the home of Defiance, was the home of NBW, was the home of other Feds out there that even as of right now, Defiance still uses the forums over at fwrestling.com. So that said, all those years you were out of e-wrestling, what made you keep F Wrestling going, and what made you have places like Defiance still rocking and rolling on your server?
Yeah, well, again, the community aspect, right? giving folks the whole idea of F wrestling. Well, fantasy wrestling, when we started it, right, we moved CSWA over, but the idea was, how can we get the guys we used to play this game with and new people engaged? Fantasy wrestling becomes F wrestling in 2001 because one of those old play-by-mail feds that I talked about wanted to buy fantasywrestling.com for $10,000, which at the time when I was unemployed was I was like, yeah, we can do that. And by the way, I just move it over to the Sun. Now, sad story, never got the full $10,000.
Oh, damn.
Legal action and all kinds of fun. But I was young and poor at the time, and so you win some, you lose some. But yeah, we moved to F wrestling, and again, it's always been about trying to be able to provide access to folks. Not every, if you think about years ago, not everybody could go and just create a website. Right now, it's so much easier. But there's plenty of other guys that have done this. If you think about Ross, you think about Argyle and his creation of Backstage, right? That was all about how can I help people, run a league without having to do all the back end that comes with running a league. And so Halcom and Dusty and their predecessors on EW Planet or EW Zine or all the different ones.
Even Solex today. Yeah, we're working on Backstage as Classic.
Right. And so all the, all that sort of stuff that, that folks continue to try and do. I'm trying to remember the name, Rough Cut back in the day, right? That guy. So, providing some, what is this thing? Right, which is, by the way, fantasy wrestling and not e-wrestling, because e-wrestling means nothing to anyone. And if you walk around and say, I play electronic wrestling,
well, right, the gimmick is the same as email. If you go say I use electronic mail, they're going to say, I don't know what the hell that is. But if you say I use email, hey.
No, e-wrestling is basically the 90s version of everything being extreme.
Brian, Chad's canceled. Get him off the E-Fed podcast.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The E-Fed. But anyway, you say fantasy wrestling, you're not going to get immediately what that is because of what's fantasy sports.
Because fantasy wrestling is, fantasy football is huge.
Closer. By the way, any game developers or coders who want to help build out the old CSWA dice game, hit me up and let me know. We'll build on to F wrestling. But the whole idea was creating a community. We added, some hosting features where people could go on and actually, have web space and have message boards and all that sort of stuff. And I know the world in many ways has moved past message boards. In some ways it hasn't, right? You look at Reddit. Reddit's just a giant message board. Nobody calls it that. It's just a giant set of message boards. Twitter is honestly just a giant message board. It's just shorter characters and, more fighting, which I find it hard to believe that there could be even more fighting than there was back in the 90s. Facebook, right, has created their own set of groups and things that are message boards. They're just done in different ways. And so
Yahoo groups and all this stuff back in the day.
All that sort of stuff. Although it's fun to see how people are, are doing things differently. But so that was the whole goal with F wrestling was how do we give access to as many people as we can, and in some ways curate the best of what's available, right? So like NBW never really, they never did any work on the forums, but the idea was, hey, set up a fan forum so people can talk about NBW. And again, part of that was about expanding the audience, right? Because if you have a website like defiancewrestling.com, that's great. How does anybody find you? Nobody's going out and just right. E-Fed podcast, right? Well,
otherwise, I don't know. Other than going out on Twitter,
the reason I re-engaged earlier this year was the Jamar Short podcast. I forget who sent it over to me. It may have been Pete. It may have been somebody else. I let it sit in my email for a while, and then I finally went and listened to it. I'm like, wow, this is great to hear. And then wait, Paul Brisbane's the next one.
Yeah.
Hi, Paul. By the way.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah. So, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, Brunk did one of these. And I know Russo did one, but I can't find his name on this list. And pizza. So I wrote you about that one. And Lindsay, which is a great.
Quick note, Pete sent his book to me, as you saw on Twitter. I received it today, and it said from PETA, P-E-T-A, and my wife said, uh-oh, what did you do to upset PETA?
Not good. Don't upset PETA. Don't upset
love
PETA.
it. Love it.
But I call him Petey Root.
Yes, there you go. Everybody's got a name for Pete.
Yes, everybody's got a name. But super fun to go back and do that. So I think there are lots of people that have been doing their version of that. I just think our version has lasted longer and, has been helpful in some eras, and in other eras it dies out. And then I have to decide, hey, I'm paying a lot of money for server space and everything else. Do I want to keep doing this? And I go, oh, yeah, I'll get new forum software and put it on there, and then figure out some other stuff to do. And then I let it sit there like I have for the last 5 months and go, yeah, maybe I should make a push to get people, over here. So,
well, let's make that push, Chad. Come on.
Yeah, you want some space. You need a message board. You need some flexibility. Actually, the new boards have some cool flexibility in them that I'll probably have to go back and relearn. But I had some custom coding done to set up some things so people have more control over certain things than they would on a regular. What's the message board provider these days?
ProBoards
or ProBoards, right? So ProBoards is interesting. It's ugly as hell, and I know people go and they try and pretty it up and all that sort of stuff. It's never going to be pretty because that's not what it's for. So if you want at least that flexibility and more, hit us up at F Wrestling, and I'm sure I'll actually check private messages one day and respond to you.
Yes, check out fwrestling.com. Check out F Wrestling on Twitter. Check out all of Chad's stuff. He's got an entire archive of all this older stuff. This is the Ultra Title and all this stuff over at F Wrestling. Defiance still runs on F Wrestling. NBW was. I don't know what's going on with them as of recently, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
They were at one time on F Wrestling and many other feds, including the CSWA. So, guys, if you need some forum space for your website, fwrestling.com. It's a great community. It always has been.
Yeah, and if you've listened to all these episodes of the eFed podcast like I have,
yes,
and you want to go back and see Bronx Fed, or you want to go back and see where Russo made a fool of himself in various places, or you want to go see where Deacon came from, or some of these things, you can go on those forums and it's all archived. You can go search for it. There's hundreds of thousands of posts archived. And people that did cards directly on message boards and things like that, or linked them up. So there's a lot there. And then the CSWA.com, all kinds of archives in different state, from text to beautiful. Actually, Travis Bevan did a template for us back in the early 2000s. It's on there. And then more I say more recent stuff. It's not recent, but from several years ago.
It's still more recent, yeah.
It's still there, yeah. And if you want to find out, all the answers to who won the ownership battle that went on for, 25 years, or why Pete Russo teamed up, why Eli Flair teamed up with Hornet at one point, and Mike Randall's to become the claim stakers, or how he turned on Hornet because he's a bad friend. How Hornet and Poison Ivy broke up. How they got trapped in
it's the WWE network of e-wrestling.
There's a lot there. Yeah, there's a lot there. And anybody that wants to be the archivist and go through and make like playlists, let me know. You want to do a lot of reading?
That'd be awesome.
I'll help you out.
Awesome. Pete's not busy, so
yeah, right. I mean, what's he doing?
Nothing that I know of.
Yeah, right. So we'll see, right? There's always, there's always potential plans. The question is just when will things get done? So when the season is.
I hit you up a year and a half ago before you knew who I was and asked you if you wanted to do Ultra Title again, and I would sponsor it. But
did you? I don't even remember.
It was on Facebook, and I never heard back from you, so I'm not surprised.
On Facebook?
Well, Brian approached you first, and he's like, oh, maybe I know him. And I'm like, all right. Then I hit up Pete, and he's like, oh, yeah, I know him. And then I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to message him.
I'll have to go back. I'm bad at Facebook.
It was a long time ago. I'm not even on Facebook anymore, so it's going to be from deleted.
I know I'm old, but I try to stay off Facebook as much as I can.
There you have it.
Speaking of toxic communities.
Well, Chad, let's get into these interview questions from the crowd. Are you ready for these?
Sounds good. Although I think I said I would respond to none of them.
Yes, you did. You did actually comment that in there, and I think I deleted it so that we can move forward.
Nice.
I did not. I am doing it right as we speak. All right, here
Oh,
we go.
good.
Delete.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'm looking at my list of other people that you've interviewed that have had some sort of CSWA connection.
Let's hit it. Hit us with the list.
Well, let's see. We talked about Jamar Short, Paul,
Yes, of
Brisbane,
course. Hi,
Andy
Paul.
Bloxham, Warren, Pete, Lindsay. I'll tell my story about her in a minute. Bronk, B. Wade, Al Larcher, who I'd forgotten about.
Yes, my guy, Al
Well,
Larcher.
I heard his interview.
He came back, and he's over at classic-wrestling.com.
He is hilarious and phenomenal. And I remember him. I mean, I remember his character back then. Colin, I think, came after the last Ultra title, and there were a couple of guys maybe after that. Who runs Eric Dane?
Justin, Angry Justin.
Oh, Angry Justin was in. That's why I'm sure that's why I got into. I heard all of Angry Justin's annoyances that he was annoyed with me. I already said Warren. I think Brock was in for a while. Of course, I don't think you've interviewed Ford.
Oh, I absolutely did. Tom Ford, yes.
Oh yeah,
although,
I did.
Although it wasn't as in depth as it should have been, and I do need to get back with Tom because there's so much.
It was a while. It was a while back, but I do remember that one. Yeah, and he's such a great guy.
Yes, I actually got to meet him in person, so that was nice.
Not yet. You've met a lot of folks in person.
Yeah.
I used to before the pandemic. I traveled a lot more for work, so every once in a while I would.
That's the ticket. Free travel works out well when you get to meet people around the country.
Gatherd and I were able to connect one afternoon when I was near Philly. So we got to go out and have dinner together and all that. That's a CSWA secret. Do you know who Chris Gatherd is?
I do. Yes, I do. Chris Gatherd is a comedian and Office member, Space Force. He was on a lot of TV shows.
Yep, he was in The Heat.
Yep.
He was the weird guy dancing. He used to write for Conan. I think he may have written for SNL way back in the day.
He was terrific on recent documentary about Action Park in New Jersey.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, terrific.
In fact, let me turn around for those on video. Here is Chris Gatherd's Weird New York book.
There you go.
We used to do this series of
Weird Ohio. There's one here.
Well, Chris wrote this, I don't know how many years ago, probably 20 years ago.
That's amazing.
Oh, and by the way, just to prove my cred, there's Pete's book right next to it.
Buy Pete's book, hashtag.
So every time I'm on work calls and people can, what we do on work calls these days is look at everybody's bookshelves.
Yep.
Their books are right there, front and center.
I got to bring mine down here and put it right behind me.
There you go. Yeah, that's what everybody does now. So, so many folks and others that probably I haven't put together or connected. My Lindsay story. So we've known Lindsay. When I say we, I'm usually talking about Steve and I, right? My buddy Steve and I, or the Royal CSWA we, I guess. Maybe I'm talking about Hornet. I don't know. But, Lindsay was Mrs. Joey Melton, who was our, first world champion and one of our first 4 characters. And Steve eventually took and role played and then, worked with Lindsay and other feds and stuff. Well, we obviously wanted Linz in CSWA. However, she was mightily offended because what we suggested was, hey, CSWA is pretty old school, remember? Right? There's a gimmick where we did the first Iron Man of Champions and Hornet and Guns are fighting and Guns throws him over the top rope, which was a DQ back in the day, folks.
Disqualification, yeah.
Long back in the day. We got rid of that, obviously, but it was for that type of G1 tournament, it was a cool DQ thing you could do to get out of the point system and all that. Well, I don't remember when this was, but it was a long, long time ago. And so Lindsay's going to come in and we're like, well, Lindsay, we don't have any women wrestling. We used to, by the way, at one point, there were 3 CSWA leagues running at once back on Prodigy. So there was like today, you'd have sort of a feeder league, but we also had a women's league that somebody ran. And it didn't run. Yeah, well, actually, we had a 4th that ran at one point called World League. Okay. Which, by the way, folks, was a football league before the XFL.
Yes.
I can look at that short time football league. But we were talking to Lindsay and we're like, listen, we want to figure out how to make this work in context of CSWA. right? And I don't remember all the ins and outs, but the idea was we want you to come in as a manager, right? And manage someone while we're literally addressing the issue of you talking to the owners about, hey, you need to let me wrestle.
Becoming a wrestler, yeah.
And the idea was, right, we would run an angle over time where all of a sudden something would happen and she would become, a full-time wrestler and get engaged with the guys and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm sure, in my younger days, it was probably bad communication, or some of it was Lindsay had faced that so much already.
Oh, I'm sure,
That
yes.
the idea was, no, I'm not interested in that. I want to come in as a character. And our point was, yeah, we get that, but we want to bring it in so that it's credible and that you're not going to have to face that crap from guys that are like, I'm not having my guy lose to a woman character, right? The idea was to almost the China sort of thing, but not anything like how they did China.
So Linz is tops one of the best writers in e-fedding.
Yep.
She is number 1 last year on the e-fed podcast top 100 countdown.
I wouldn't go that far. I'm kidding, Lindsay.
She's great in Defiance, amazing in how she's a great role player, great at angle. I got to give her props. She's an OG. She's got the skills to prove it, and she went into a male-dominated hobby and crushed it. And so shout out to Linz, because not only that, but even today, she is still, even in a world where now there's so many more female handlers, Linz is still arms and legs above most. No offense to anybody out there listening. Linz is an OG, and she's been around the game forever. So she's a great writer. Right now in classic,
she's been around forever. You're making her sound old.
I'm not. She's not.
She's not old like me.
Listen, now you're gonna get me in trouble. Okay, no. But in classic dash wrestling, we do have the anti-intergender rule, and it is a thing because we are classic wrestling. We are 80s wrestling.
And so the CSWA was started, by the way, folks, in the 80s. Just to underscore that again.
But Lynn's
classic.wrestling, I can't even talk, wrestling.com is set in the 80s. CSUA started in the 80s. So
there you go.
Rules. We didn't have an official anti-intergender rule,
but she saw the rule and she still joined, and she applied as Bowie Abrams, one of the Surf Express bros. Nice. And she has a great time tag teaming with Brock, and they write an incredible tag team that I absolutely love. And they just picked up a huge win.
We're going to find out he's really a butch woman.
There you go.
Find out. Is really a woman. We're going to find out, and she's going to break the rule.
She's going to break the barrier in classic too. I can feel it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she's such a great member of the roster, and you appreciate having her on. You don't care what she's doing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you don't have a bunch of 15 to 19-year-old boys that she has to deal with as well, right? Like we did back on Prodigy or early F Wrestling days.
And she also knows me as a handler has no problem taking the L to Lindsay Troy whatsoever.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So that helps.
No one should at this point.
No. All right, Chad, let's get into these fan questions.
All right, I've delayed you enough.
Okay. I got to take a restroom break. That was a little break for Brian, so he knows where we're at. So I'll be back in a minute or two.
All right, I'll do the same.
Okay, thank you. All right. I just gave my dog a milk bone, so hopefully he's quick.
Oh, I'm very happy.
D'Lo hangs out with me while I record because he's
Nice.
silent all
Nice.
the time.
And you're a Bengals fan, almost as bad as being a football team fan.
Oh, are you a football team fan?
Football team fan.
I rock hard. I don't play around when it comes to my team.
Nice. Nice. Brian Pillman would be proud.
You're right. See, that's a cool connection. Otherwise, yeah, it's been a rough fandom for the last 20 years of my life.
Yeah. I got distracted from my Gethard story. I forgot. So Chris Gethard actually role played in the CSWA.
Okay.
Greg's little brother, right? So he was in there for, a year maybe.
Yeah, so I tried. Greg tried to reach out to Chris and see if he would be on the podcast, and no dice so far.
No, I can't imagine that. Although, of course, he's got a famous podcast too.
Yes, maybe I can get on that one.
Just call it. Well, every once in a while he'll send a tweet out and say "call in."
Yeah, there you go.
A cool story. And he and Colt Cabana are good friends, or they're friends. I don't know if they're good friends, stuff like that. But I remember I wrote Colt one time. In fact, it was back from one of the Ultra titles. I was thinking about advertising on a show, and I wanted to find out how much it was. And so my in was to say, "Hey, you and I both know Chris Gethard," but it was like trying to show some credibility. So anyway, the ad rates Colt was getting the first time I asked him were significantly different than the second time I went back and asked him for Ultra title, and I wasn't going to pay that much money.
I reached out to Tony Schiavone because two of my friends, e-wrestling friends, were flying in from overseas, and we were all going to hang out. And I said,
I remember hearing you talk about that.
Yeah, and he wanted something like $4 or $5 grand to come to hang out for a day.
Oh yeah, he's big time now. It's not the days. It's not the Starbucks days.
I'm like, I was thinking like $1 grand. Cool, I'm in. Like it would pop my friends. It'd be the coolest experience ever.
Yep.
So much. But after that, I was like,
oh yeah. Well, we had an idea one time for Ultra title we were going to have celebrity judges. Like I think I reached out to Foley.
Yeah.
Trying to see if I could even get in touch with that moment. Right, because the old story is that he knew about FWO and had a character.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I'll reach out to him and we'll make a big donation to Rain, his, the cause that he supports. But never heard anything back.
Yeah.
That was many years ago.
All right, let's rock through these. We got about 30 minutes, so no big deal.
I've done pretty good. I haven't.
Yeah, I think we covered it very, very well, and we can obviously do detailed specials.
Yeah. Well, we can figure out if there's anything that's really interesting in detail.
You didn't handle much. You basically fed-headed from the start of e-wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell Hornet's story, but that's not half as interesting as the F wrestling, one wrestling, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, good deal. All right.
I'll tell you about how Bob Ryder was making 20 grand a month at one time and couldn't pay us on time.
Jeez. Unreal.
Yep. I never watched TNA because of that. Refused.
I used to pay him $10 a week.
Yeah. Now, Ryder was part of it, refused to do it. But yeah, I know we were there when Cher and Johnson were there. And well, in fact, one thing I didn't tell, we created the first ECWWrestling.com.
Oh, yeah?
They didn't like it. And so they went to Mike Johnson, who did his first website, I think. I think he's the one that did it. But yeah, technically we did the first ECWWrestling.com too. I still got, in fact, somebody would probably love them. I have old CDs full of pictures from ECW shows that Bob sent me and wanted like loaded up on the website at one point. I've still got all those physical
That'd be
copies.
pretty cool. All right, Chad, from the crowd, here's what we got. Up first is MDG. That's Modern Day Gladiators. Check it out. It's Warren. He's on drivethrurpg.com and has a new Kickstarter for his new tabletop board game. So check that out. Warren says, did Hornet always win in the dice version of the CSWA?
So I did not go, and I knew this question was coming. I refused to go dig through my files again and look. But we did actually have win-loss records. And
okay.
We'd go through, and we'd have everybody's name printed out and we would keep win-loss records. And so there's various iterations of those over the years. We had top contenders, all kinds of cool stuff that we would do for ourselves and then on Prodigy. At one point, I remember I want to say when he got his 200th win, he had 9 losses. Now, the first
that's a 0.45 ratio or
the first
0.45%.
2 came in the first 3 months of the Fed. And then he held the world title. Let's think about this. The first time he won the US title, he lost it 2 months later. He wins the world title the same weekend because he was still technically the number 1 contender. Steve still is annoyed at me at that. He's like, he should have been the number 1 contender because he lost. I'm like, we hadn't updated the contenders yet, bud. Talk to Tony Khan if you have a problem with it.
Where win-loss records mean something. All right.
Yeah, so he holds the title for almost a year. He loses it. He wins it back. And then he doesn't lose the title. That's 89. He doesn't lose the title until we do that first worked result, which was 92. And he's gone around and merged, 30 other titles into this thing. So, yeah, he held it for 3 legit years through the dice thing without losing it. So, pretty impressive.
Well, his next question is, how many times did you fudge the dice rolls? And if not,
depends on who you talk to. If you talk to Steven, he would call out 2 incidents. One, we were so my parents we went from having this really small car to a full-size van. And so in the back, it had like a full couch and everything. And so we would sit back there and, like we had a little tray. We'd like roll the dice and do all that sort of stuff. Well, we were on our way from like church to lunch, and we had said, hey, we'll be in a minute. We're going to sit here and try and finish this thing. And I was clearly going to lose. And I was like, oh, time limit draw. It's too late. We got to go inside. We're supposed to be inside for lunch. So that was one time. And then there was another time we literally were recording. Like Steven had this little handheld video camera, and we were literally like recording this to show people how we do it. And Hornet was going to lose the match. And I forget how I fudged my way out of that one, but it was to a complete and utter jobber. His name was Tony the Technician. Yeah. So we were just showing like, oh yeah, and this funny, haha, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, cut. We got to redo this somehow. We got to figure out how he went. Now Steven had his own versions of that he'll never admit to, but it happened. So I would say twice. There are other times that Steven, like we were on the phone one time, 3 of us, and we were doing a match. And they're like, there's no way you rolled that same number for that move all those times. I'm like, no, I'm legitimately sitting here and it's happening. And they, to this day, believe I cheated and I didn't on that one. So.
Well, there you have it. He fudged them all the time. No, kidding.
That's right. Twice.
How exactly did that dice sim of the CSWA work anyway?
Yes, of course, Warren would want to know this because he wants to steal it.
Because he wants to use it on his tabletop games.
Steal it and create a tabletop game. No, I think I posted on Twitter, like, again, when we were 12, we literally wrote a handwritten letter to TSR, which owned, like, Dungeons & Dragons and stuff at the time. And we're like, hey, you should buy this game from us. I don't think we ever sent it because otherwise, why would I still have the handwritten letter with coffee stains and stuff on it? I don't know why it has coffee stains on it. We didn't drink coffee. But
the streak continues.
So basically, if you think about multi-sided dice you would use in like D&D or some other game, we had a 20-sided die, and the idea was, so what happens when you go into a ring? Well, they lock up, right? They lock up first, and what happens? Somebody gets the upper hand. Somebody gets control, we called it, right? So you would roll the 20 or eventually 30-sided die, and you roll it, and one player was odd, one player was even. Can't get any simpler than that. And you would roll that, and you would get control. And there were a couple little things that we added, like if you got on a 20-sided die, 19 or a 20, that was double control, right? You actually got 2 moves. So you went from control to a move. You had 12 moves. So, of course, you used a 12-sided die. And you'd roll the die, and let's say you're Hornet, and you got his... I don't know, it could be anything from a headlock to the Scorpion Deathlock. They all had point values. So we had this list of hundreds of moves. They all had point values ranging from 5 to 100. And so if I rolled, a brain buster. Well, that was a big move. That was a 100-point move. So if I rolled that, then that got deducted from my opponent's total. And depending on how big the match was, depending on how big the total was. If it was a championship match, it was 1,000 points. So you take 100 points off, and then you go roll control again, and then you'd roll for your move again. And let's say you got the Boston Crab, another 100-point move. Well, it also was a breaking move. So now there was a table with a 10-sided dice where you would roll and the person would have to break out of the move. So first time, get 100 points for the Boston Crab. My opponent has to try and break. They have about a 30% chance. If they don't roll one of those, they lose another 100 points. They get to roll again. So there was usually a max on how far you could go with the break, right? It's like 100
So
move.
the points work almost as a health system. You start with full health.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
And
it was just like hit points. It was just a bigger number. It went with, with this move set. So the idea, and then in your moves, they had to add up within a certain range. So you couldn't just be like, I want all 100-point moves, or I want all moves that break, right? You can only have 3 breaking moves and that sort of thing. And then we got into like, well, there's a setup move. So if you get Hornet Splash, then if he gets the next control, he automatically gets his finisher.
Yep.
Right. And if you rolled your finisher, you automatically got a chance to pin. So once you got, the whole idea was you would break them down till they got under 100 points, or may have even been under 50. And then you could try and pin, and you would roll a type of pin. So there were 10 types of pin. It could be a sunset flip, it could be an Oklahoma roll, it could be whatever it is, but you get a type of pin, and then you rolled an 8-sided dice. And if you rolled a 3 or you rolled an 8, then you pinned. If you rolled a 2 or a 7, that's a 2 count. If you roll a 1 or a 6, that's a 1 count. If you rolled a 5, then you missed whatever you were doing. And if you rolled a 4, then your opponent reversed the pin. Right.
And then you guys start over. Yeah.
Well, they would actually get a chance to then try and win the match.
Yeah.
Like if they reversed a sunset flip. So those were the basics. There's a little bit more to it, but the whole idea was, you're trying to knock down somebody's hit points. There were rules for if you get below a certain level, you can't do a move. You have to get back up to 50 points or whatever it is. So, it was fun. It could be quick if you wanted it to be. If you added more points and different things, it could be, take longer. There were tag rules, all kinds of stuff.
So last chance for us to edit that out and for you to sell it to Hasbro.
Yeah, no, I think that time has passed. They actually, Champions of the Galaxy came out a couple years after we started fantasy wrestling. We would keep an eye on the game stores actually, but anybody that wants to help build a beautiful online version of that, let me know.
Well, there you go.
And Warren can take it and actually say, hey, none of that works. You need to change it.
Warren does some great magic with his stuff. I tell you what.
He does. It's all great stuff.
Especially that new character, Mikey Unlikely, in the in his game. So, what is your fondest memory of the expansion into 1998? We had so many great new characters: Vizak, Love, Powers, Radder. It's a long list.
Yeah, and he didn't throw himself in there with Deacon. There were a lot of others that came right on the heels of that, like Jamar with Triple X, and I've already talked about Mike Dove and Evan Aho, and Jason Martin had a great character, and Shane Southern, he's about to get married, I think, coming up soon. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Jamar Nicholas always had great folks. Ford came in with High Flyer. Although I think, again, that was later. I think I talked about the fun part was it was a restart without baggage, right? So Prodigy had, at that point, 4 or 5 years, and it had a lot of baggage that came along with it. It was the same people, the community had started to shrink. So being able to grow that again, and then to sort of use the Hornet character or the Wyndham character or the Merritt and Thomas characters to then sort of give the rub in some ways to these new characters and help grow them. Brian Wade was a part of that, right, with K9. Awful role plays in the beginning with K9, got so much better.
He's still bad.
Yeah. No,
Love you,
but
Brian.
well, they were. I think I found some. I should pull them and show you how unreadable some of the early ones were.
We're gonna read them on the air here today. No.
Yeah, but being able to bring them in, try new things with them, and then see them sort of take the lead on, okay, I just won the title, and now how do I do this for other people? I think that's my favorite part. And the story, I mean, the stories you got into with Eric Zebo was a part of that. I don't think I've mentioned him yet. He had Good God, Kevin Powers, Eddie Love, who was only in, as far as I know, was only in fantasy wrestling for, at the time he was in CSWA. Just a phenomenal writer. If he had stayed in, he was Gethard level, or Russo level, or Brunk level. I mean, he was that good in terms of, especially the face-to-face stuff, right? He didn't do a lot of, hey, I'm going to write character development role plays. It was, hey, here's what we're doing, and
I'm gonna beat you.
here's why. Yeah, here's why I'm the best. But he was just the funniest guy.
Favorite Sealy moment or favorite Sealy memory? The Elimination Squad, if you forget.
Well, I step back to that other thing. I will say one of my favorite memories from that 98 to 2002-ish run was Hornet turned heel and took a branding iron and branded a dude. That was fun. Because remember, he had been a face for 12 years.
I was about to say about 10 years, yeah.
13 years at that point. So yeah, that was fun. Sealy, yeah, that's a Russo question by far. You want to read Sealy moments? There's chat logs hidden that Pete can direct you to, I'm sure. Scott Sealy was one of these guys that took it more seriously than he should. He was a young kid. Russo only remembers him because he had a run-in with him because this guy brought in the Eliminator, or brought in his version of the Eliminator, and Russo had been in previously with the Eliminator. So when he came back, he had to become Eliminator Eli Flair, right? Which, he picks on the name Hornet. Eli Flair, right? But he had this whole stable of guys because he couldn't work with anybody else. I think he had a guy named Space God. And so, it wasn't like now when you're just like, yeah, we have the cream of the crop, right? You had all this continuum of people because we just sort of kept things open before we got more restrictive. And so you'd have kids that would come in, edit that out, Brian, that cough button. But you'd have these kids that would come in and they didn't know what they were doing, but we didn't just want to like kick them to the curb because you wanted to continue to grow and have people interested. Sealy was old enough to know better, and was just it was just annoying and more annoying, and would just keep going on. For anybody that was in one of the last Ultra titles, he was the Spooky Doom of the early 2000s.
There you go.
So anybody that gets that reference, somebody that goes, no, I should have won over this guy. Chad doesn't know what he's doing. Why is he making these decisions where I don't win? Because that doesn't make any sense. So it's like, okay, whatever.
Everybody's done that at least once.
Yeah. Yep.
Not
me. I would never.
What's the best thing a handler ever said to you?
Yeah, I saw that question. I don't know what the best is. I can tell you.
What's the worst?
I can tell you a couple of phrases that to this day Steve and I cringe at.
Oh.
And so we're on Prodigy.
Okay.
And again, by the time we're on Prodigy, I'm like 16. Steve's 17. So we've got kids ranging from 12 to older than us that are competing. And somebody decides to make one of those like threads where it's like, hey, let's get to know each other.
Yes.
And here's
how old
are you?
Where are you from?
How old are you? And what about this? And what do you like? And what do I like? And somehow it turned into, what's my weird deepest secret that I need to share online?
Whoa.
But when you're that age, you don't have that many weird deep secrets.
That's like some targeting stuff.
Well, it's very straight. Yeah. So these days, and again, probably not the most politically correct, but all I can tell you is these two quotes. We had this one kid on there who was the first kid that joined up. We put him in the Ultra title. Nice kid. In fact, he's the guy that Hornet lost the championship to. It was sort of a bone to him. We knew he wasn't going to keep it long, but it was like, hey, we'll throw this to him because he's been around. So I won't say his name or anything. I have no idea where he is now. He's got to be, he's clearly in his 40s by now. But he writes, I'm 14 years old and I can't run. And Steve and I read this and we're like, what? We're not doing these threads anymore. Like, I don't think we set it up. But that's the first one. So then the response to that is from another kid who, by the way, had that El Nino character that we took and turned into a complete freak and got involved with Mighty Morphin Power Midgets and things like that. But he was younger and he just responded to it and said, I have two daddies. And this is in 1992 or 93. So this was not a normal conversation that we were all having. And I don't remember any others from that, but we were like, yeah, we don't need to know any more about you. We appreciate that you're in the CSWA. I don't need to know your deepest, darkest secrets. I don't need to know,
I just need to know what the Eliminator is doing this Sunday.
What's the Eliminator doing, and why is he in a barbed wire baseball bat match?
I like it.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. So, how's Steve doing these days?
Steve is great. He is gainfully employed and married, and they have a little girl whose 1 year birthday just happened, and we'll be having the party this weekend.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Did you realize that championship is one word?
I did. Now, what this tells me is that Warren never read Fish Fun 14, which, by the way, was subtitled Finn, because it was the last card that blew up the whole 25-year-long saga. So I will shortcut it for you. So I told you earlier about this battle between the Red Midget, the announcer Sammy Benson. Merritt was involved. Other people got involved. Years later, and again, long before WWE did it, there was a hacker. And the hacker starts taking control of just fiddling things into the CSWA airwaves, right? They don't make sense. We had a big hiatus in the middle of that, and I had to restart it at one point. But we do this hacker angle. And I don't know if do you ever remember what ARGs were? Augmented reality games.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, there was one called The Beast. There was all this, like, literally, there's still, I don't even know the password to get into it. They're still on the site. I had set up like these clues, and you were going to have to go find this stuff. And there was a whole CS Enterprises file site that you were going to log into and find these contracts. And it was going to give you little pieces of the puzzle. That was too difficult to do. But what we did instead was that became so the FWO and some of those angle feds would do, like, I remember the FWO did one where we've been bought by Disney. And so, here we're going to build this in the storyline, but then, by the way, we're going to have like riots and stuff. So like there was this whole, several months long storyline with this sort of, hey, here's the situation that's going on. And we're still going to have cards, but you need to react to that situation. So the hacker started doing things and eventually like sets off the fire alarms during one of the TV shows, and everybody has to evacuate and sprinklers going off and all this sort of stuff. So now it's gotten serious. And now Merritt and Thomas are like, what the hell's going on? We need to figure this out. Well, back in the days, the CSWO would go on a cruise liner. Again, before AEW, by the way. It was called the Parsons Cruise Liner because the Parsons family had their own set of stories in the early CSWA where they were looking for Elvis Presley, who, of course, everyone thought had died, but he didn't, which is why there's a card called Elvis Lives in the CSWA. But anyway, they're on this cruise liner, and we set up this whole series of cards where the cruise liner is been taken over by the hacker. And so this whole series of things happens. People are locked in rooms together. There's all these stories going on, but there are still cards that are going on. But as you get deeper into them, people are realizing that the boat's been hijacked, right? So people are freaking out. And all
There's
this
more
stuff
panic as the show goes on.
So there's more panic. And then, so finally they get off the boat. The hacker is in essence let them off. And that leads to this big culminating card, which was not posted, by the way, for over 2 years. So we go on. So I think I told you that's when my mom has her first accident. Well, when we come back, we actually wrote the card or part of it as the big finale, because it was this big hacker finale. And so we find out that the red midget never died. He masqueraded as a Make-A-Wish child and eventually partnered with one of the wrestlers, Cameron Cruz, for whatever reason. But we find out that the hacker was indeed Sammy Benson, and that he has this years-old story of a poker game that happened where Stephen Thomas, the commissioner, one of the owners, actually, while he was drunk, signed away the CSWA as part of a poker game. He loses it to Reyes Cornett in the poker game. And Sammy Benson was good friends with Reyes Cornett. So he now has this napkin that says that he is the owner of the CSWA. And so it's written, that card is written like it's part of, Alvarez's book, The Fall of WCW.
Yeah.
It's literally written as the beginning of the book. And it's an interview that's happening with Merritt, who was not in the company, and all this sort of stuff. But in the middle of that, to finally come back to Warren's question, yes, they acknowledge that the real name of the company is not Championship Wrestling Alliance. It is Chad and Steve Wrestling Alliance, because it was created by a 12 and a 13-year-old who thought putting their initials on it would be cool. And that ends up playing into, hey, Sammy, you don't own the trademark because it's not Championship Wrestling Alliance. You don't own the trademark, and thus you can't run in the United States. You now own the company, but you don't have any money to pay anybody. You created this big fiasco at this giant arena that now that the company you own has to pay for. And if you want to go to Europe and run the CSWA, then feel free. So I think we wrapped that back in when we came back in 2013 somehow, but that was the big story. So yes, the secret was out that CS was not Championship.
Is that the story you're sticking with?
That's what I'm sticking with. Yep. We always knew Championship was not 2 words.
Best CW or CSWA story and worst.
Who knows, right? When you look at 25 years of stuff, basically, I don't know. I started reading through some things, thinking about it. There's just some great stuff in there. If you look at, the Eli Flair stuff, if you look at the Deacon story going all the way back to 2000, unfortunately, some of that is not there because there was a big server crash and we lost some files. But, there's some great stuff. And then I just told you about the cruise. It was called the Cruise of Deception, by the way. That's a fun story in my heart. I don't know that anybody else cared about it or liked it, but it was fan service to myself. So I have a soft heart for that one.
What's up with the midgets? I'm kind of hoping that Is Your Mom Hot OG plays into that whole thing.
Yeah,
it was just
I don't know who that is, but I haven't listened to his episode yet.
That's Ridiculous. He's the one who asks if everybody's mom's hot every episode.
Got it. That makes sense. Got it. No, I think I've talked enough about the midgets. It's where they came from. I really will try and put together a little read along for you to go back and find the top stories of the Red Midget.
The definitive midget edition.
The definitive midget edition, absolutely. The omnibus, yes.
Megan, leader of 5BW, wants to know, since you are the OG of e-wrestling, what do you think of the current state of e-wrestling from the past? What's good and what's bad?
Yeah, hi, Megan. I'm not actually the OG. I'm just the godfather. So, Pete says he refuses to kiss the ring.
Once you reach level 20 in the eFed podcast Discord, you are an OG.
Yes, yeah. So I need a special godfather status on there. I talked a little bit about it earlier. It's hard to say, right? Because I'm not as connected to it as I was. I think I think there's some communities out there that are really cool or look like they might be cool. I need to dig into some of them more. Um, but I think there's even more opportunity to sort of pull some of those threads together and again provide resources and get more. The whole idea is about how you get more people involved, right? We're in the beginning of what could be a new wrestling golden era,
Yep.
right? And we were in the middle of that. If you think about 97, let's call it 97 to 2001, right? The Monday Night War era. So whether you were one wrestling, that was the perfect time to start, right? Or whether you were fantasy wrestling or F wrestling, you got a lot of people and a lot more traffic than you normally did, right? This thing is incredibly niche. It's not fantasy football,
No.
but I think there are ways to make it more, um,
Mainstream.
yeah, well, more user friendly, right? So like if you're a 16-year-old kid today, are you really going to be able to go into a league and get involved and figure out how to engage, right? When you got a bunch of 40-something-year-old guys that are really focused on their stuff. Now, I'm not saying that's how they all are, and maybe there are a lot of 16 or 19 or 20-year-olds that are in, but I think that the problem is when you let your community start to age out, or not age out, age up, and you're not pulling new folks in some way. And that's why things like Ultra Title or things like that were always interesting and important, not because we got a lot of kids involved, but you got a lot of people that hadn't been in leagues before or that had tried it one time and came back.
No, it's a great point. And e-wrestling, I think, is slowly aging out. Or I say e-wrestling. The written e-wrestling is slowly
Yeah.
aging out. And things like Caw and Created Wrestler and
Yeah.
2K and Fire Pro, those things are taking over as far as the younger crowd goes. And that's great. E-wrestling is existing. It was Dice, it was Mail-In, it was Prodigy, and now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's evolved over the years, and now it's gotten to video games. Video
Yeah.
games are so awesome and immersive and creative these days that
Yeah.
you can do things you couldn't do 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
The only thing you can't do with those is really tell the story, right? And so you
exactly.
can wrap the story around that, but you're gonna have guys like, I don't like the real wrestler pictures. Well, there are whole communities where you've got leagues that's what they do,
Yep.
right? They pick Ryan Reynolds, and that's my character, and so I'm gonna, which by the way is not different, Megan, than the old days. So if you go back to GeoCities, right,
Yep.
there were people that were figuring out, how do I put colors in my role play, because you had to do your own HTML,
HTML.
and how do I put this GIF, and then how do I put a picture of,
And how do
you
I get
know,
middies in there?
how do I
Yeah.
get middies in there? How do I put Stone Cold's picture in there, or whoever my version of the Undertaker? So honestly, if you went back and looked, some of those aren't very different. But like I said, there are some out there, like there are some really neat concepts out there. By the way, those of you trying to do it on Twitter, I don't know, dude. Or trying to do whole leagues on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I don't know how that works. Maybe it passed me by. But there is going to be something new. There's always going to be something new to be able to be brought in. And the question is, are you going to be able to have your community open up for that,
Yep.
or not?
I mean, before I started the EFED podcast, I only knew Angle and Roleplay written EFEDs. I didn't know
Right.
anything else existed, and it opened my eyes to a lot of different ways, a lot of different ways people play the game, and from picture based, like you mentioned, to poser feds, to everything in between, to the 2K
Yeah.
feds where you're
Yeah.
completely customized.
Yeah. Which, by
It,
the
it's
way, we were using No Mercy to determine a couple matches back in the day too, when we
hey,
didn't want to actually roll them out.
I can't
But
blame it.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, like you had the social media fed guy on. I haven't listened to that episode yet, but interesting.
Yeah,
And again,
video play feds. I mean, can you imagine me and you are videoing right now back and forth via message or via Skype? Can you imagine doing this and cutting a promo as Hornet?
well, I saw one of those, so the answer is no. Nobody wants to see my fat bald head, and and no. So I saw one league. I don't know if it was one you did or I found when I was Google searching or something, but I'm like, you guys are 30 something years old and you're cutting promos on here, and I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, it's somewhere in between. Like, yeah, should I be ashamed that I'm writing wrestling promos online?
Yeah.
Or should they be more ashamed? I don't
Well,
know.
and there is part of that, right? It's not like Steve and I ran around and telling people, "Oh, by the way, we run."
Well, it's the same
Uh,
as being a wrestling fan. There's a
well,
certain,
there is, or a comics fan, or whatever it may be, right?
yes,
But you talk to people within your
nerd.
fandom.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk to people within your fandom, but outside of that, right?
But
And
here on
even
the EFED podcast, we celebrate the fandom, we celebrate the nerd, we
yeah,
celebrate the fun of all these variations of e-wrestling. I don't care how you get down, just get
yeah.
down.
Well, that's the thing. And again, the danger is when you get to toxic fandom, right?
Yes.
And so you get things like Lindsay experience, or you get versions of that. Well, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that thing. Listen, I'm not a big pick based guy, but if you want to do that, that's great. Just tell good
The
stories.
fact that Lindsay Troy is still in e-wrestling in 2021 is incredible because I'm sure she faced some shit along the way.
Yeah, there's no question.
A
Yeah,
lot
for
of
sure.
men. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. I've heard. Well, I listened to your podcast. I heard some stories that I hadn't heard before, for sure.
Uh, Finally, from Megan, to get back on track, does Hornet sting?
I already answered that one. The question is, does Sting Hornet?
All right. Up next is Greg of Greg Gethard fame. How did e-fetting impact your life?
Yeah, Regulator always has to ask the hard questions. So again, I would encourage you to go back and find. I think it was a Slate article that Greg wrote. It's probably 10 years ago, but he talked about basically how e-fetting, how fantasy wrestling helped shape him, get him ready for real life. And I think that there is some of that, right? And so we've talked about, I handled, but handling wasn't my main job, right? I would take Hornet places. I would do some stuff. I would handle them within the CSWA, or other ancillary characters. But my main job was setting a structure, right? So that whether it was building a community for F wrestling or within CSWA, setting a structure so that we could tell those stories and have the website set up and all that sort of stuff. So, number one, we got to build the first major wrestling website in the world, as far as I'm aware, unless Japan or Germany beat us to it. But when wrestling was big back in the day, folks, I know it's an aftermag now and you can't go on there and it's always had too many ads on it and everything else, but it was a big freaking deal. And it was years before. I wish I'd reached out to Meltzer and Alvarez years before, because they could have been on the web a whole lot earlier than they would. I mean, now they're the guys, and they always
Mhm.
were from a news standpoint, but from a web presence standpoint, it took them a long time. So that was cool, and there's things from doing that I've been able to pull into work, or my
Real
knowledge
life.
of
Yeah.
how some of that works. Writing alone, I mean, one of the things we always prided ourselves on, and one of the reasons that sometimes things were so slow, and again, this is a bias. So I think there are great feds that write in different ways than CSWA did. But for the most part, we were telling the story within the context of a television show. And so in a television show, you have announcers that are telling you the action, right? And you can have some parentheticals that say, hey, this thing is happening, or this sound effect is happening, or whatever it is. But a lot of what you get when people write is you get an intro with announcers, and then you just get,
A
here's the
block.
text-based
Yeah.
element of a block of text that is the match, and then, hey, wasn't that great? And again, not to say we didn't do some of that, especially in the later days. Or if you're in an angle fed and you read it and it reads like it's not fused together. I used to call it threading. So you can go through and you can read that these are very different writers that have written segments,
Mhm.
and yet they're not well connected.
Yep.
So again, how do you do that? You can do that with announcers. You can do that with some other narrative, connection that you want to make. But we would go through and edit. I would go through and edit those things. Stephen Thomas is a better writer than I am. He's much more he's much more creative than I am. I'm a great editor, right? And so that played into my work, right? As
So so is Lynn's, yeah.
yeah, well, Lynn's, I mean, right, that's part of
That's her
her work
profession.
directly,
Yeah.
right? That's her profession. But certainly played into mine being able to write, but being able to effectively edit and coach others as they're engaging with clients and putting proposals together and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's something to just uh, I'll use this writ large. It's not meant to sound maybe as pompous as it will, but the leadership aspect, right? So if we've gotten this deep in the podcast, nobody's listening. You can find out who I work for. It's not a secret, but I work for a nonprofit that's focused on leadership. And so we go out and we train people and this and that. But when you think about the fact that leadership always happens in a collective, right? A collective's always just a group of people that are here for a purpose. And so how are we going to accomplish that purpose? And so figuring out how to influence people, and not in a negative way, right? But to really hear them, listen to them, but also help them hear other perspectives and join that together. So going back to when I talked about, hey, this guy would have an ending for a match, or this guy would have an angle, or this guy really wanted this. How do you thread all that together and pull it together? And at the same time, they may be diametrically opposed because, by the way, you've made them diametrically opposed by putting them against each other.
Right.
But again, in a little bit different way than an angle fed, where they're not really diametrically opposed. They're still collaborating. And there's still some of that if you think about CSWA, but there was still a competitive aspect that people liked. But anyway, being able to sort of think about how that then builds you as a team leader, as an executive, as some of those things. There's still, all that stuff is still in, quote unquote, real life work world. And some of it, if not more, is just as petty as when we were kids on Prodigy boards yelling at each other about differences of opinion.
Anytime we have to write an article or anything involving actual writing, they always ask me to do it because I have experience, and
right.
I don't tell them where the experience comes from, but
yeah, exactly.
It does affect your real life, and I think it's a benefit to most. So
yeah, for sure.
Do you prefer fantasy wrestling or e-fedding as a name for the hobby?
Already answered. I know that cat's out of the bag, but e-wrestling is a stupid name. I know it's the name. I know this is the e-wrestling podcast.
No, this is the e-fed podcast. Let's get it straight.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the e-fed podcast. You're correct. Mm-hmm. No, I get it, but I don't walk around, saying that everything I do is I went to an electronic course today. I went to an I know we stick E in front of everything. I think it's dumb.
E-bikes, emails.
Yes.
I don't know what else. Yes.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Right here on the eFed podcast. Okay. Thanks, Greg. He asked a couple other questions, but I think we've covered them on the show. So I'm going to go to Pete, who's up first or up next. Question 1 from Pete. Was the finish of Last Call booked the way it was to keep you and Steve from getting a divorce?
Yes. There's no question. Yeah. So the short version of that story is I'm trying to remember if I wrote it down here so I could remember, because if I get any element of it wrong, Pete.
This is a Pete question. Pete will hold court.
Yeah, Pete already knows the answer to this, but basically, Hornet and Wyndham had always been friends and tag team partners, and in stables together, whatever it was. We put them against each other. I think maybe this was the second time we put them against each other as a dream match. I don't remember if that one was for the title, but the ending basically was the referee had a heart attack. So we're in the middle of the match, and the referee, is something happens, and the referee starts freaking out, and he has a heart attack. And yet Wyndham is still trying to get him to be the referee, and he's just mad at him. And Hornet's like, we got to save his life, and Wyndham's like, why can't he count? He needs to do his job. So that was the schmozz finish that we used for that one, because the idea was, we were never actually going to roll a match, for example, against each other, because we would have, it's your baby. You're not gonna take your babies and have a.
You're not going to be the L. Yeah. Who's your favorite situation? Awesome. Was the finish of Fish Fund 11 booked as a gigantic FU to Schmid? FU to Schmid. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'm sure I went back and looked at that and pulled it up somewhere. I'm trying to remember what it was, but oh yes, I know what that was. So that was, I talked about the Hornet Guns feud earlier. That was sort of the middle of the feud. There was a career match. We called it Fish Fun 11, end of an era. Hornet and Guns. One of them was going to have to leave. Fed wasn't big enough for both of them, and there was already real life feuding between Schmid, who ran another league, and us, and that sort of thing. So Hornet, I believe that's the one where he comes down to the ring. It's in an arena in a jetpack. So he like descends into the ring on this jetpack. And so everybody thinks Guns is going to lose, and that's going to be the thing. And of course, the swerve is Hornet loses. He's getting ready to win. He hits a couple Hornet splashes. Something happens. Guns is basically out. He's out of it. And we never heard the end of this from Schmid because we brought back a couple of his old manager and stuff, which he really hadn't been role playing recently. But they got involved. They cost Hornet the match. Guns is basically out, but he's got his hand over Hornet's chest. You get the 1, 2, 3. But the FU was Hornet then, while Guns is still passed out, climbs up, sits on the top turnbuckle, and basically gives like a 20-minute speech about, hey, I'm leaving, but all this sort of stuff. And the handler was not happy because his guy's just knocked out in the ring.
Laid there, yeah.
Like, we didn't even have like his manager roll him out or anything. It was just like, no, literally he's laid out here and Hornet's sitting on the turnbuckle just running him down.
After he just won, yeah.
Yes. But that is that's a well done thing in wrestling, right? You got to get the heat back somehow.
You got to sell the hold, brother.
That's right. He lost his career. He didn't come back for over a year. It's a long time.
Of every CSA or CSWA roster member from the very beginning, is there anyone that never won the World /EN/Unified title that you think should have?
Pete, I'm sure, has his answer for this.
He knows. Pete's never asked a question he doesn't know the answer to.
And right. And so if I answer it, it'll be the wrong answer. I'm trying to think who never won it. Kevin Powers never.
K9 for sure.
Yeah, Kevin Powers never won it. I would say probably Jamar Nicholas's characters, like Blaine Hollywood. He easily could have gone on and won the title. Maybe High Flyer.
There you go.
Would have been one. And then there were a bunch of guys that came in the last couple of runs that easily, so there was Vince Jacobs and Ruben Ross and Alias and Nova, basically the entire FWO contingent. So there was this CSWA contingent that goes over to FWO, and years later there's this FWO contingent that comes over after Ultra title. Richter was in there, all those guys. So any one of those could have. In fact, I think we were probably angling for either Ruben Ross or Alias was probably.
I wonder if that's the same Alias that's running today.
Alias was run by
Ian.
Russ.
No, two different guys.
I think.
Okay.
But any of those guys could have been the top guy for sure.
Well, Alex Smiley is up next. Our good friend Alex. If you could bring back anything from the good old days of e-fedding to the modern era, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of that. I would just to harp on it, I would just say, some broader level of connectivity. I think there are a lot of feds that are just too insulated.
Yep.
In my opinion, and could take some, could look at some of those interfeds, for lack of a better term, some of those circles that are doing it and have a lot of people in them. And if they figured out a way to open that up, could really get some new blood in and do some new things.
I think the days of interfed have gone away, but there's definitely opportunity to come back, and we just need to
Yeah,
see
I
it
think I
happen.
would call it community more than interfed, right? I don't think the days of, hey, we need to have everybody with a single champion and that sort of stuff. That's not going to happen. But you think about, um, well, take Defiance and HOW. They don't interact at all that I'm aware of, even though they've had similar members. I'm sure there's some bad blood there somewhere because there couldn't be with Angry Justin and Lee Best over the years. You have those two guys. There's got I don't know any of it, right? But you take those as sort of two of the top feds. How are they interacting with other feds, with other people in the community? How are they pulling in some of those kids who are the good kids in those other circles that might really be able to succeed if they had a chance elsewhere? So maybe somebody just needs to tell Pete we need another ultra title. I don't know.
Maybe we need to get on fwrestling.com and make it happen.
Maybe I will tell you the easiest way for me to get more involved is when I see interest and activity.
There you go.
That's
Let's make
that's
it
what
happen.
that's what gets me excited.
I got a dog that's clawing at my door. Hold on one second.
Got it. No worries. I know we're running along now.
No, we're good. Get upstairs. Go. Oh, that's a loud one. I can't let her down here or she'll
Yeah,
chew on something or claw something, or she's
of
always
course.
bark at someone outside who's a mile away. All right. Okay. Up next was Brian, but we covered his question about all those midgets. So Pete's back up next. Number 4, when you inevitably reopen the CSWA at some point in the future, will you finally let Mike Stanton in?
Well, Pete's the one that opened it for one card, so he had his shot. Here's the quick Mike Stanton story. Mike's a great writer. I don't know how great a human being is. I haven't interacted with him in a number of years. No, I kid. Mike and Steve stay connected. I don't with Mike because he doesn't like me, and the feeling might be generally mutual. I don't know these guys. That was a long time ago. Yeah, he won the Ultra title back in whatever year it was. This was on Prodigy, so it was a long time ago. It was, I think, 95. And so the winner of the Ultra title was going to get a shot at the CSW World or Unified, whichever version it was at that time, who was Mike Randalls, who was, big name, was CSWA, NFW, a bunch of other places, I'm sure. But the way we worked in it was early enough that we would post card lineups for multiple cards at a time. So, it might be like, hey, we're doing prime time in San Antonio. Here's the card, right? And Randall's is going to defend his title, blah, blah, blah. And here's the next card, and Randall's is going to defend his title against whoever. Well, Stanton got annoyed because he said, well, clearly you're working this and I'm not going to win.
It was predetermined since he's already booked.
It's
Yeah.
predetermined because you've already announced it. And I'm like, Mike, just like WWE, they're going from town to town. The champ's going to be on the card. And if he loses it, then
They'll
it's
just
known
switch
that
the name.
card's going to change and it'll be a new guy in there. But he just was adamant that even though we had just had him win, and he would not have been the person we would have selected to win, even then, this giant 128 man or whatever it was tournament, that somehow we were going to screw him because now we wanted to put over, our champ,
Yeah.
who wasn't even, our guy. So anyway, that's the Stanton story. So no, if I was leading it, I'm not sure I would let Stanton in. Although Stanton did great things, by the way, in Bronx Fed, but he was still a pain in the ass from what I
heard. Pete also says, don't make me ask about gloves or Mike Ventolo.
Yeah, Pete has his own ideas of strange things. I don't know.
So Highlander 4H is up next. It's Ron Hall McDonald. Why do hot dogs come in packs of 8 and buns come in packs of 6?
It's all about sales, buddy. I'm a
There it
sales
is.
guy. It's all about sales. It means you got to buy 2 packs. Smartest thing that the bun guys ever did. 6 or 12.
Up next is
Plus,
Alec. Go ahead.
plus, by the way, they got machines that do that stuff, buddy. They can't just slide it over and reconfigure it. They're making a lot of stuff there.
You want the hard questions? This one's from Alex Smiley. Why the hell am I not allowed back in the FW server?
I don't know. I saw that one and I was like, I don't know. Just message me and we'll figure it out. There's a lot of people that have old hosting accounts, which, by the way, I'm still paying for somewhere. That if they had really, really old hosting accounts, I may not be able to help them. But if the files are still on the server, I can get to them, and I certainly can, at the very least, get them their files. By the way, there's probably some scary stuff on that server. And I've had that same server now for, well, it's not the same server, but it's the same company for like 20 years. And there's 20 years of data. I mean, there's crazy old stuff on there. Like if you want to go back and see the original CSWA website and, old F wrestling stuff, there's some cool stuff on there. But there's also where, I would let people have space that could go sign up, and I didn't monitor it. So one day I remember I was going through stuff and I was like, what the hell is this? What's wrong with you people?
Well, you love to see it. Just like e-wrestling, there's some weird stuff out there.
Yeah. F wrestling.
F wrestling. Fantasy wrestling.
Yeah.
However you want to put it. I always do tag fantasy, #fantasy wrestling.
Yes, I'm aware. But yeah, you should dual promote the fantasy wrestling podcast.
I should.
Along with the eFed podcast.
Brian, buy that domain real quick. All right.
There you go.
So
there you go.
Chad, thanks so much for joining us today, buddy. I had a blast interviewing you. This has been great. It's the extended edition of the eFed podcast. We're going to go a little long. Call it the Pete Russo Rule 2.0.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. I don't know why you didn't sit in on this. I'm disappointed, although it probably would have gone, 4 hours.
Another hour longer. Brian is also known for going on his rants and raves.
Yeah,
so.
And he would have reminded me of a whole bunch of stuff, just like if Russo or Demar
Brunk or anybody else.
Yeah, they would hold me to account for a bunch of stuff, I'm sure.
Well, good, Chad. Before I let you go, is there anybody else you want to plug, promote, put over, or fwrestling.com? Check it out at fwrestling, I assume on Twitter?
It's at fwrestling.com on Twitter.
Yes, there you go.
CSWA.com if you want to go back and see some crazy stuff. But ping me on Twitter, post on the F Wrestling boards if you say, hey, you told this ridiculous story, where do I go to look at it? Or hey, I'm interested in some space on forums or your site.
There you go.
Or hey, we want to pay you a lot of money to run another Ultra title or something like that.
Ryan, get on that. Yeah.
So anyway, let me know. And I'll put Russo right on it.
There you go. Have at it. Pete is on the job. Just like you can get his book over at Amazon. Gotta put it over. One Chance, Legend of Valerian's Garden. Okay. Chad, thanks so much, buddy. This has been a blast.
Thanks, Mikey.
All right. Before I let you go, can I get a, hey, this is Chad. Godfather of e-wrestling. You're listening to the eFed podcast.
This is Chad, the godfather of fantasy wrestling, and you're listening to the eFed podcast.
That's money. I like it. Thanks, buddy. This was a lot of fun.
Right, hey, this was fun. Look forward to. Hopefully, I'll somehow get connected to more stuff.
It's
go from
2 to 4 weeks. It'll be posted.
Oh yeah. No worries. No, I'm just talking about in general. Hopefully, I'll get connected somewhere, and as wrestlers would say, see you down the road, right?
There's so many, of your handlers in my Discord that I'm sure. I tried to get the F Wrestling Discord going, and we'll keep pushing it here on the show or something.
Yeah, that's my fault, right? Because I put all that stuff up and had grand ideas as usual, and then got pulled back into work and some stuff. But
yeah, inactivity is the death of e-wrestling. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's for sure. We'll see. Hopefully, my 20-year-old can keep his head above water and in school and with his fiance and all kinds of fun stuff. And everybody can
Yes.
stay healthy. Maybe I'll have some time to focus. So
There you go.
anyway, yeah, I got a new job at the same company last year during the pandemic, and so much less stress and stuff. Not trying to manage,
That's
50
awesome.
people and all that. So that's why earlier this year I was like, oh yeah, I need to find a creative outlet. And oh look,
I'm now
e-wrestling.
managing 15 people. So
Yeah, I know how it goes, buddy.
Oh,
I know how it goes.
yes. All of the drama.
Yes.
It is like running a Fed at work.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah. Well, seriously, if you ever need, like I said, I work for the Center for Creative Leadership.
Yeah.
So, if you guys are ever looking for resources or you just need something, for one of your folks or something, just let me know. I can,
Absolutely.
if you have somebody that has, that is struggling with something or whatever, I can at least look and see if we have anything that's of use and send it to you.
Cool. No, I appreciate it. Let's keep in contact for sure.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, buddy.
All right,
Take it
thanks
easy.
for this. Sorry for keeping you so late.
No, you're good. Have a good night.
All right, man. Have a good night.
See ya.